what would you say to young students, let's say like myself, who wanted to speak out about some of this stuff, but it was like the community was just so suffocating?
You might not want to die on that hill because it's early in your career.
Yeah.
Right? I don't mind dying on that hill. Professors need to stand up. Many of the younger ones will not. If they're pre-tenure, they definitely will not. I know several professors who side with me on some of these topics, but they're not going to say anything. They have families and mortgages, and this is their job, and it's a secure job, and they are not going to put it at risk. And I can't really blame them for that. I have an opportunity to speak out. But what then happens is you get targeted. So, and that's sort of what happened with this PAIRS project. First of all, apparently I'm homophobic.
I guess, I mean, for people who don't know exactly what we're talking about, I can just read the post out really quick. The PAIRS project, they're apparently a student advocacy group against sexual assault on the U of T campus. Of course, they found a way to politicize something as serious as sexual assault, which I consider incredibly irresponsible. So they put out a list. It was a Instagram carousel post, and the first slide reads, documenting the University of Toronto's longstanding history of complacency and protection of problematic and or predatory professors. They include Dr. Leigh Revers in this post, and I think it's insane.
I'm a predator. I predate.
They include you in this list of, once again, and I don't even know if the allegations against these other professors can be taken seriously either.
No, let me make a point about this. The whole thing is deranged. They have no business whatsoever in interfering in these matters. If there is harassment on campus, then students should report it, and then that needs to be looked into. Absolutely, 100%.
You weren't, accused of harassment in any sense. They accused him of transphobia, homophobia, racism, fat phobia, which at the University of Toronto from the PAIRS project basically just means this guy's probably got a good head on his shoulders, because these words mean nothing anymore.
So, what's amusing about that is, of course, it sort of got circulated, and I got emails of support. Eric Kaufman wrote and said, Leigh, that's fantastic. You've had an impact. And in fact, I would happily debate those people on any of those topics. Let's face it, we're at university, and we're at the top university. Also, U of T keeps telling us, top university in Canada. What better place to have a debate? They never come forward, do they? You can go to university and have all of the threatening and potentially offensive things removed from your universe. You think that's going to make you strong? It's funny you mentioned Rhonda McEwen, because she was, I have a bone to pick with her in some senses. Universities need to closely pay attention to the fact that they could destroy their own mission. They don't believe really that they're here to make students employable. They're here to indoctrinate students into a utopian belief system. I joined U of T to get students good jobs. I wanted to give them an opportunity to springboard into an industry which I think is really interesting, the pharmaceutical and biotech industry.
We have these things called Crescam Serviendo Awards, basically recognizing student service to the college community. I call them Scam Serviendo Awards because you're about to understand why.
I wouldn't trust any awards granted by universities now. In fact, if I were an employer, I would take that as a negative. I just think it's quite crazy how cultural Marxism is just everywhere in universities. It's just absolutely everywhere. Yeah. Anyway, so it's an interesting story overall. As I look back on it, because none of this has gone the way that I could possibly have predicted. Yeah. Well, I always think it's funny because students are very interested in, let's say, they're very interested in discussing with professors, let's say, the direction of their career, what they're going to do. And I never know what to say to them. Yeah. Because I think
such a different world.
Yeah. Well, because I looked at my own situation and go, there's no way I could have predicted any of the things that really actually happened to me. Yeah. I know that you're supposed to have plans, and I think that's fine to tell people to plan for the future, and have have aspirations. But no one knows what's going to happen, and so all advice is futile. Yeah. That's certainly how it seems to me, and so I always find it super difficult to give advice to anyone. It puts me in mind, I don't know if you know this guy, there's a famous film director, and by the way, when you want to record, just go for it.
Yeah, no worries.
I have a habit of just giving stories.
We're rolling now, so we can just roll into it like this if you want.
So there's this film director, Canadian, Atta McGoyan.
Okay.
he was really a significant director. When would that be? Probably the 90s. One of his movies, Exotica, won the Palme d'Or, I think, at Cannes. And I became a bit of a fan of his movies. And, because he was Canadian, I was curious. I didn't know much about Canadian film. And at the time, I was at university. And I'd got involved in, it was called the Oxford University Film Foundation. It's a bunch of students, like you have a student club, right? And one of the things we did was to invite people, right, from around the world. So we invited Atta McGoyan, and he came with his wife and Arsene and his young child at the time. And I remember meeting him. And of course, we had a session where he would sit in front of a group of students for an evening, and we'd have conversation. And I remember that very well because the students were always asking, like, how did you get your job? Right? How did you become a famous film director? Because we all figured, well, he must know. Because he's directed multiple films that have risen to the point where they're internationally recognized. He's won awards, and probably he's one of Canada's most famous independent filmmakers. And of course, he didn't know the answer, because people don't know how they got there. I mean, he could spell out there's Max. He could spell out the order of events, right? Like what happened in what order, right? He managed to borrow some equipment from Hart House at the University of Toronto. And I remember that story. And he said, I started making movies, and that's pretty much how it went. But he had no actual insight. He couldn't tell people how could you become a famous film director, which is kind of what they wanted to learn. So I feel the same way. It's like when students come to me and they go, "Oh, how did you get involved in, or how did you become a university professor, or I understand that you were a founder of a biotechnology company," which is true. I was involved in one of those. I go, well, completely by luck, more through luck than judgment. And so advice is quite difficult to give, right? And actually, I'm suspicious of anyone who then says that they know how to give advice,
right? Because
my experience is no one knows what's going on.
Yeah.
You just make the best judgments you can with the evidence around you, and you take opportunities, right? And you look out for opportunities, and perhaps you try to do things that will maximize the opportunities, right? The chances of them happening to you. So, see, I mean, that's a sort of interesting view. I don't know what other professors would say about this, but so I always found that the hardest part about being a university professor, and so I became a university professor mostly by luck. They posted a job one day.
Yeah.
And I saw it in the newspaper. And I thought, I kind of always enjoyed academic life when I was there. And so then you wind back, and you I guess I have to put myself in context as, where did I come from and how did I get to this point? But it's a long story.
A lot of people tend to attribute success to luck, especially unsuccessful people. They tend to attribute success to luck, but I love the saying or the equation that luck is just opportunity and preparation, meeting at the right time.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, perhaps it's a bit flippant to just say luck, because there is some luck involved, but luck will happen. I think there are opportunities that spring up for everyone.
Yeah.
And the question is, do you seize, carpe diem? Yeah. Do you seize the moment? Do you take advantage of it? Are you ready?
Are you ready is the main question, yeah.
Yeah. And there have definitely been situations where I've been unready.
Yeah.
And then afterwards you go, God, dear, I missed that,
Yeah.
So I'm British. Well, actually, really, I'm English. That's always a confusion for people.
Are you English or British first? What do you tell people? What do you prefer?
Well, I've just actually watched David Starkey talking about this. British isn't something that the British use about themselves, right? It's what people from outside call us.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Britishness. Yeah. So I'm English.
Got it. Okay.
England is a nation in that sense. It's a country, and sometimes people forget that. I think. I'm not Welsh. I'm not Scottish. I'm English.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is a sort of a pact between essentially four nations. And you guys in Canada, you know about that because you have, at least at the moment, you have agreement between all your provinces, and they're big enough to be countries by themselves. Right. But you decided to have a federal sort of arrangement. So it's a bit like that. The difference, is there a difference? I don't know enough about it constitutionally. I mean, we're all under the monarch, and for king and country and all of that, you know. So I'm English, and I was born in Warwickshire, which is pretty much in the dead center of the United Kingdom, right in the middle. And Warwickshire is known for a few things. Warwick itself, which is the main town, is famous for its castle. It's one of the most beautiful medieval castles. It's huge. Definitely worth a visit. But it's also famous for other things that have been actually in the news lately as well. William Shakespeare came from Warwickshire. J.R.R. Tolkien, although he wasn't born there, was from his family was from Warwickshire, and he lived in Warwickshire most of his early life. And it's the Warwickshire countryside that is his inspiration for the Shire in Middle Earth. So those were things I think about. Yeah. If I want identity, or I'm thinking my own identity, what is it? You know. Yeah.
What is identity? It's different for every person, but maybe a key question should be, what should identity be? Because we're seeing a lot of issues where people are identifying with things that are I guess problematic to the whole. You know, for the longest time we always associated, you know, the nation or your nationality with your identity, saying like you're saying I'm English, I'm Italian, I'm Finnish, I'm Russian, I'm Congolese, whatever it may be. But the reason I think that worked is because it united you with the people that, you know, you were around, that you were with day to day. Nowadays, especially at U of T, I'm sure, as you know, they're pushing the main I guess components of identity to be incredibly divisive, like race, sexual orientation, all this type of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's just that word, right? Yeah. It's changed. See, when I was growing up, the word identity. Well, I think my first recollections of things like it cropped up in mathematics, right? Because there was identity was when you mapped something onto itself, right? Yeah. So you know, typical scientist who would think of that. But then I would have thought, if somebody said, "What's your identity?" I would think of different identities, and that would make me think of James Bond, or right, you know, the idea of someone undercover, because you have multiple identities. And that then might be connected with passports and documentation, and that would make you think about your height and your hair color, and, you know, isn't that line in is it Casablanca, isn't it? I think I love Casablanca. What a great movie. You know, Michael Curtiz, was it 1941, something like that. And in it, they're having a discussion, and Humphrey Bogart says, "Do I really have brown eyes?" or something like that, because they have his identity information. So I always thought it meant those sorts of characteristics if you were going to drill down, and then it also becomes about belonging, doesn't it? That's the thing, you know. I really come to despise that word belonging. Because there are a number of words that have been
corrupted.
Yeah. they're Trojan horse type words as well, I think, because they've got multiple meanings they're dissembling.
Yeah.
Right.
Tolerance is one of those.
Right. Yeah. There's quite a few actually, and so identity and belonging, and so it's come to mean, a series of things. It's almost like a menu, and you're choosing off the menu. Or like I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and skin color, let's say. Seems to be one. I mean, again, as a scientist, if we were going to get really serious about identity, I'd say, well, 23andMe would give you my identity, because I would, you could look at my entire genetic makeup, and that would be pretty accurate, right, and thorough.
Yeah.
A fulsome understanding of who Leigh Revers is, right? Okay, we'll look at his 23andMe, his genetics. But that's all very scientific, and it's not really the dialogue we get, or the cultural narrative we've got now. Identity is about, like you say, it's to do with some made-up groups. Actually, I mean, like race isn't even a thing, right? I mean, I deny that race really exists. I mean, what you're talking about is different ethnic groups, right, which might be culturally different. And they might, okay, so their average melanin density in their skin might be different in different parts of the world and so on, but it's a gradation, right? It's a gradation. So who's to draw the line?
Right.
I mean, to the point where, I always find it really hilarious, because it's very obvious that people like Meghan Markle are just kind of capitalizing on the knowledge that she's part black.
Yeah.
When she really looks a bit like a Mediterranean, sunbathing. She's been sunbathing. That's or something. Right. I mean, they're doing it to gain political, not political capital. It's social capital, isn't it? Yeah. So there's this game going on now. So I didn't used to think of identity the way that people do now. But then, of course, reflecting on that, then I could have those identities, right? So then I become white, I become male. I also, because I'm gay, I'm part of an oppressed group. This is a bit of a wake-up call. It's like, oh, good, I can claim some oppression points, apparently. Yeah. I never really wanted those. Yeah. But seems like everyone's accumulating them. So it might be, it's a bit like when you get an RRSP or something. Everyone's getting one. Do I have any of these? Yeah. So apparently I do have some oppression points. Although being gay these days, nobody cares, seemingly. But I would then say, well, nobody cares about some of the other things either. So there's an obsession, right? And then it becomes politicized, because a lot of this seems to come from the left. To me, it comes from the left, certainly, and so it's. I find the whole thing problematic. Yeah. I think it creates an environment where it's truly divisive, right? Because people start becoming so tribal about everything. Yeah. I mean, and of course, with critical race theory and some of these topics, you can look at everything through the lens. I'll say through the lens of race. I also find it really annoying, when these social scientists and humanities types, they come and start using science language, right? A lens, right? Yeah. That's to do with optics, right? That's physics. Stop, looking through the lens of, and then what are you talking about? Is it concave or is it convex? So those are the sorts of lenses that I understand. Yeah. But no, there's the lens of race, apparently. Now, I don't know if you know, but of course everybody knows this. Lenses distort, right? They might bring some things into focus, but they also distort other things, right? Anyone who knows anything about lenses knows that. I mean, I wear glasses, I just think it's hilarious. So they constantly apply. So they've got this one lens, apparently. There's one lens, and they sort of carry it around in their pocket. And it's like, right? And I'm going to produce this lens, and I'm going to apply it. I'm going to look at every topic under the sun through this lens. Yeah. Don't you think that might be a problem in itself? Yeah. That's like saying everybody's prescription glasses are going to work for every circumstance. I think I've got 3 pairs of glasses. I have to have, a different set for reading. Right. So I mean, the whole thing is comedic, right? If you start thinking of it as a scientist would think of it. So yeah, the lens idea, I think that's funny. But they do. They come in and they say, we're going to look at this topic through the lens of, racialization or something, and white oppression and supremacy and goodness knows what else. Yeah. So anyway. So I mean, yeah, it's a good question to talk about identity, I suppose, and it's definitely. I would never have thought about it like 10 years ago.
Well, you did mention that. I watched your podcast with the Awake at the Wheel guys there.
Right.
And you mentioned how all this constant reminding of why we need to be aware or conscious of this racial or sexual diversity makes you think about it and perhaps even think or act more racist than you did originally.
Yeah, I know.
I had this issue in high school. I was like, you guys keep bringing it up. It's forcing me now to see certain groups as oppressed when they're clearly not. I don't want to see my friend who I play basketball with as lesser than me and who deserves a leg up,
No. Well, the whole thing is quite easily dismantled. That's what I find amusing about it. It doesn't take a lot. For example, the left then, I mean, it's essentially readaptation of, postmodernism.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't know much about postmodernism at all until I was thrown into this.
Yeah.
But I had to learn. And, it's all about deconstructing things. So they look around the world and they see problems and so on. And they like to make it simple by dividing it into some sort of binary between those who are oppressed, the victims, and those who are oppressing, the oppressors, right? That makes for a satisfying, simplified universe, right? And everything can be on this sort of binary, and then you can choose which side to be on, sort of like a Nietzschean kind of good and bad kind of universe, which is completely at odds with actual objective reality, which is something else they deny, right? It's all relativist, right? Your lived experience is as good as mine or something, or is equally valid. And that's a nice thing to say. It's a sort of humanist thing to say, I suppose, because it's sort of saying, your lived experience has value to me and mine should have to you. And I get that. But it doesn't mean it's equally correct. Yeah. Because there are objective truths, and we all know that. And it's slightly insane to deny that. So I always had trouble with these folks when they started talking about oppressor and oppressed. And in fact, what they've done is made language oppressive. So they're the ones who are oppressors because we're being oppressed, because we're told we have to think in these ways. It's like authoritarian. It's imposing on us ways of thinking. That's the oppression. Mm-hmm. So I can even turn it into their language, right? So they should censor themselves immediately because I'm feeling victimized, right? I'm a victim of your bizarre mutation of what, by the way, is my language, right? I mean, that's another super frustrating part of this, is that I was educated in England. English is my language. It happens that English has become an international language, and that is by virtue of Britain's, role in the world in previous eras, which overall I would say is a good influence in the world. I know a lot of people disagree, but I'm with Nigel Bigger on this, and his book Colonialism and Moral Reckoning. It's a very good book. It's on my shelf over there. I've met Nigel, and I mean it's incredibly oversimplified just to say, well, the British were evil and they brought terrible things to all parts of the world. I mean, obviously it's a mixed bag, and I think, as he points out, on average we did overall good in the world, right? In the world, and one of those good things is to bring English as the international language. No, it doesn't. It could have been another language, but English is quite an interesting language because it sort of assimilates other languages. Mm-hmm. It's a bit like the Borg, I suppose. It just seems to have that ability to adapt. So I do get a bit frustrated, because here I am in North America, formerly a colony, right? And people tell me how this language works, and I'm like, no, you've just co-opted it, and I find that oppressive, right? Because it's like, imagine if it was reversed, if the language of the Inuit or something were we took that to be more broadly used, and then we started to tell them what their words actually meant, and they sort of objected. How would that play out, right? So you're telling the English, the native English, the indigenous English, that would be me, or people like me, what these words mean. So I kind of object to that.
Are these sorts of ideas sprouting up in the UK as well, though?
Oh, yeah, certainly.
But
yeah. I mean, I haven't experienced it in the UK, but I know a number of my friends friends I've come to know, or count as friends. You always wonder, don't you? It's like, should I say friends? People like Eric Kaufman, for example, who's Canadian, who's at the University of Buckingham in the UK. I mean, he left Canada. He's definitely faced these sorts of problems, and there are a number of others who have. So, in his book, he talks about cancellation. And so it's definitely happening over there. Of course, there are a number of figures who've suffered at the hands of the mob. So it's definitely happening I would say it's happening across the Anglosphere. It has happened across the Anglosphere, and this is kind of old news now, because I think it's obviously, it's kind of got to the point where maybe it's settling down with the Trump era, and we're seeing the pushback now. Let's not get on to that yet. I could tell you my 10-point plan for fixing university or something. So Britain has got big problems in this area as well. Kathleen Stock as well, famous lesbian author and outspoken in sort of the gender issue. Again, she was hounded out from University of East Anglia, I think, and so I always forget all the details, but these are sort of commonplace stories. And of course, University of Toronto, U of T. U of T's really big in the international stage for one reason and one reason alone, and that's Jordan B. Peterson, right? I mean, in that sense. I always think that's funny too. You think of the university that I'm a professor at, their biggest claim to fame from a scientific point of view would be the discovery of insulin, right? 1921, Banting and Best. I think Banting was up for like greatest ever Canadian at one point. I think when the CBC did a kind of poll of Canadians, he lost out to Tommy Douglas, I believe, but he was on that list, right? So great scientist, of course, physician, and that would be U of T's one of their greatest claims to fame, very reasonably. But in the last little while, I mean, it must be Jordan Peterson, right? Because this guy is everywhere, right? I mean, he's changed the consciousness, I think, of people, certainly in the people say the manosphere, but I mean, I think it's broader than that. I think in the online media in general, on YouTube and right. I mean, originally he was sort of people identified him with the sort of incel community and sort of all of that. Right. But he's much broader than that, and I mean, he's one of the most significant intellectuals right now, at least in terms of, in terms of his exposure, right? So he's a colleague at U of T. Wow, amazing. He's still emeritus, still an emeritus professor, and I will be an emeritus professor, I understand, as well, when I retire, which will be nice because I'll still be able to claim I have some sort of connection to the university. I didn't expect this from U of T. So U of T, I mean, what is U of T, and how did I come to be with them as a tenured professor in what they call the teaching stream? I came here in 1996. It was after I completed my doctoral degree. I didn't know what to do, right? I think when we talk about advice, right, you ask for advice. Well, what do I do in my career? And didn't know whose advice to take, really, but I did seek advice. And there was a gentleman who I still know, Dr. Ian Wilson, who is a professor at, he's in Vienna, I think it's the University for Bodenkultur, I think it's called. He's been there a number of years now, but he was an advisor of mine. He was postdocing at the time I was finishing writing up my thesis, and he advised me to travel. So he said, you should see the world, because that's what he did, and you should look to do a postdoc somewhere. And he introduced me to an eminent Canadian scientist, a guy by the name of Harry Schachter, dearly departed. He died a couple of years ago, I think, and I was introduced, and that led to a trip out here, and I ultimately came to work at the Hospital for Sick Children here in Toronto, working for Harry Schachter. So Harry was a professor at U of T, so I knew about U of T from quite early on, and that was really an interesting time. Got to do research. It was really, the science was really good. Sick Kids has got a tremendous reputation, well deserved. Some top scientists. And I had the opportunity to do a sequence of postdocs, actually. It's quite typical for an academic, which led to me working at a different hospital, Princess Margaret Hospital, which is also very well known. It's very close to Sick Kids. Right? Mm-hmm. It's on the other side of the street on University Avenue here. So I worked there as well, and in that era, it led to a sort of collaborative opportunity where there was this opportunity to start a company, a biotechnology company. So I got involved in the private sector for about 7 years, I think it was. About 7 years. And we started a biotech company here in Toronto. And I still wasn't part of the university. I think I had what's called a UTOR ID at that point, right? I had one of those because I needed access to the libraries. Right? So I remember going to the libraries, right? Because great universities have great libraries, and U of T does have a good library, probably the best in Canada. That was a very different, unexpected turn of events, right? To be in the private sector and to do science in that sector, which is rather different from doing science in the public sector, where you're chasing grants, right? Mm-hmm. Here, you have tranches of investment from investors, from shareholders. It's a totally different world, right? Performance, you have to prove your worth every few months if you're going to secure continued funding.
Do you think that time in the private sector has informed your academic career?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I guess, it was just really, people sort of indicated that once I'd gone into private sector, I wasn't going to come back to academic life. And there were definitely some indications of that from academics generally. There was this idea that you were a lost cause.
Interesting.
If you'd gone all the way to the point of doing a PhD for several years and then postdocing, and which is essentially the path you should take before you become a professor. Yeah. So you've done all of the preliminaries, and you're an adept. But now you need to find your post somewhere. You got to chase down an assistant professorship somewhere and be on the tenure stream. Mm-hmm. If you decide to step out of that, then you're betraying all of academic life, essentially. So it was like, you'll never come back, and we wouldn't let you come back. It was just quite funny, really. Yeah. So I never thought I would ever come back, because they told me it was, you've shown your hand, right? Right. You're clearly a turncoat. You've gone into that nasty private sector where people make things called profit, Well, there's the irony for you, right? So 7 years in the private sector, in which, it was very bumpy. We managed to secure money here in Canada and ran that, kept the company alive. But in the end, it was facing a sort of brick wall in terms of further investment. Canada's not the best place for high-risk investment, and certainly not in biotechnology. It's minute on the scale of the American side of the border, right? Where you go to the US and there's just much bigger players involved, and they're far more sophisticated. I mean, the issue with biotechnology is that there's a lot of science. So to understand whether an idea is a good one to pursue and to invest in, you need to do a lot of science. You need to evaluate the science, and that takes a lot of, it's very specialist, right? Mm-hmm. But in America, they have a big enough investment community and venture capital community that there are these specialists, and they have their own PhDs, and they fully understand the cutting edge technology. So they're a much better place to make those decisions. So not surprisingly, that company kind of folded here and migrated to the US.
To Austin?
Yeah, it went to Austin. Yeah, which apparently is great. I mean, I went down to Austin a couple of times. They offered me a job down there actually as part of the company, but I kind of put down roots here. I quite like Toronto. If I was offered this opportunity today, I'd have gone to Austin. Yeah, it's the timing that counts, right? At the time, I thought Toronto was the bee's knees. I thought it was the best city. And
was the city keeping you here? Sorry, was the city keeping you here, or was the university keeping you here?
No, because at that point, I still was only a guy with a Utah ID. Right. When I was private sector, I still had an association. Once they give you one of those Utah IDs, you have one for life, right? So I was always able to access the library, but again, I wasn't employed by the university at that stage. We're all good? Yeah. So at that stage, I wasn't an employee of the university. Never had been, to my knowledge, really. So I could have taken that job, but I chose not to because I like the city. Now I'm a country boy, from England, and the city's kind of like, wow, it's cool, and it's cosmopolitan, right? You have cocktail bars. Don't have cocktail bars in the Cotswolds, where I'll be retiring to. So I just thought, well, Austin's pretty cool, but it's Texas, and no, I kind of, this is the irony of all this. I'm actually quite, somewhat socialist minded. I don't mind paying heavy taxes for, universal health care, all of that, which is a thing here in Canada, right? And so I was a bit nervous about the US. How odd. Yeah, I was. So I stayed, right? And so I looked around for another job, and that's when I saw this posting. It was in a magazine or newspaper or something, and it was for a teaching stream position at the University of Toronto based on their Mississauga campus. So that's out a ways from where I'm living. I'm in downtown Toronto here. And I thought I'd go for it. And I got it. And the reason I got it was because they were looking for something that fell right into my bailiwick, or, into the ballpark or the arena, whatever you want to call it, of my experience, my lived experience. Because they wanted someone who had a hard science training up to PhD or beyond, which I had publications, which I had because of my postdocing, and I got publications from my PhD as well. So, I got the publications, but in addition, had industry experience and knew about biotech, and preferably had worked in biotech or pharma. And I checked all those boxes. So there was no DEI statement that I had to make or anything like that, thank goodness. Otherwise, I would have never got the job. That was this would be about 2006. It's a long time ago. 19 years ago. So 2006, I was offered this job. I think I was offered the job on my birthday. A lot of things seem to happen on or around my birthday. So it was the winter, 2006. They gave me a piece of paper that said, we're offering you the job. And I negotiated a bit, which apparently they found a bit shocking. Because, in academia, they're like, what? You're trying to negotiate? This is long before Donald Trump, but he was alive. But they, now I'd be, what do you think you're Donald Trump?
Yeah.
You're negotiating. But I mean, all sensible people should negotiate any contract, right? So I negotiated and eventually kind of got a deal that I liked, and became this tenure stream teaching person, which I didn't even know what that was, frankly. I mean, it's hilarious, right? I mean, you step into a job, you don't really know what you're going to be doing. I taught before. I taught at Oxford. I was a college lecturer for about 4 years at Exeter College. So yeah, I mean, it's fairly familiar with students, and I taught them organic chemistry back then. So it wasn't too daunting to take this on, although the way teaching works in Oxford, at least in my era, is very different from what I was to learn students at U of T go through or have to endure. You don't get as much attention. But yeah, so they gave me these courses and I started teaching. And the other thing I should say was, what was a really fundamental part of the job, although it wasn't papered that way, but they came to sort of tell me, we want you to do an administrator role as part of your job. That's quite unusual. So academics don't normally opt for these university jobs of being lecturers or being professors. If there's any administration, they hate the administration. Yeah. So you're expected to do some administration, and they'll give you a portion, like 20% of your time or something. But no one ever joins in order to do administration. Right. They join in order to teach or to do research in a lab or something like that and publish, right? But this one was very different because they wanted the majority of what I did kind of to be administration. They wanted me to help run a professional graduate program called the Master of Biotechnology program at the University of Toronto Mississauga. And I was excited by that because I had these sort of business aspirations. Right? I'd already been an entrepreneur. Shortly after the company that we started, Molecular Templates, the one that went to the US, after that one had gone away to the US, the founders got back together when we started a second company called D5 Pharma here in Toronto. And so, which is kind of a virtual company really, but we still wanted to be in that space. So I sort of had this familiarity with, companies as an entity and running them really. I kind of enjoyed that,
And are you still active in D5?
Yeah, I'm CEO of that company.
Yeah.
And we have a little bit of money and we do a few little things. I mean, I guess it's a bit of a sandbox for a couple of academics like me, But the idea of running your own little business, and so actually when they offered me this job at U of T, it struck me that, this is another opportunity for me to kind of create my own little business or run a little business, because that's essentially what it is, because it's a program, and the Master of Biotechnology program is a graduate level, what they would call professional program. Professional means you pay more money, right? It's similar to an MBA. So the MBA at U of T comes out of the Rotman School.
Do you think it provides more value for the money that it's charging?
The Master of Biotechnology program?
Yeah.
I think it's excellent value. And the reason I would say that is because there's, as far as I can tell, 100% placement record for students in that program, graduating from that program, getting jobs in the industry.
Awesome.
So, or at least getting placed in the industry, whether they then starting their careers off. And so we've got a very, very strong track record of doing that. So you can sort of say that the money you're paying definitely translates into a career jump, into what's quite a difficult area to get into.
Yeah, because that's typically been, I guess, the main the point of university.
Yeah, of course.
And nowadays, I think people are starting to question that. So I wasn't sure if that program...
Well, yeah. And I don't know what the current stats are on the program because I'm no longer involved.
Right.
But for reasons that we'll get to. So yeah, I still think it's a good investment. Or it was certainly. Yeah, I'm going to probably step back a little bit from that and say it had a heyday, right? And the heyday would have been anywhere between, well, about 2005 to 2018, 2020, before the pandemic. I think then it started to pivot into a direction that I don't think is ideal. And so we can get into that. And that's happening all across education. So it's not special to the Master of Biotechnology program. So anyway, my job was to be involved in running that. And I did. And I have been involved in running that for 17 years of the 19 years I'll have been working at U of T. So that's essentially the story. So that's how I became. And then 5 years after that, I went through the tenure process. Right. And I got a glowing tenure review. I remember some of the comments it was really nice to get. I mean, I put a lot of work into what is called a dossier. It's a teaching dossier, which is a sort of, so it's like a thesis, I suppose. It's an accumulation of all of your teaching practice and all of the good things you've done, all the courses you've taught and how you've changed them and updated them and made them cool. And I was really into that. So I got good reviews, and I think one of them was something like, "This is one of the best teaching dossiers I've ever read." It's like, this is the one against which others should be measured, and it was really quite warming to get that. You think, "Gosh, I must be on the right track." Well, how wrong I was, but that was in 2011, so still well before what I would call the pivotal time, which is about 2015, so the last 10 years, the last decade is where things have gone wrong. So I kind of snuck in under the wire, and I got my tenure, and just as well. Otherwise, I'd be unemployed right now. But then, so those last 10 years, what happened? Well, I was what was called associate director for this program. So they didn't want me to be director. It's sort of standard practice. They're not going to make you director of a program until you've got tenure. So but frankly, I mean, to all intents and purposes, I was running the show because everyone else wanted to be hands off because academics don't like to do administration. So I was still kind of really running it behind the scenes, like a sort of eminence grise kind of character. And then somebody else would be the de facto director and take all the credit. So that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. You have to serve your time, right? You have to do that. And then relatively shortly after I got tenure, I became director. When my predecessors had enough, their term came to an end, and then they appointed me. And so I was director for nearly 7 years. And at that point, I suppose, you could argue, maybe it went to my head and I started doing all sorts of crazy things that were beyond the expectations of the higher ups, the people in the higher up in the administration, such as, trying to do my own website for the program and stuff like that. And that started to get problematic. They don't, this is what's so funny, right? I mean, so this program, the Master of Biotechnology program, it's under an umbrella institute to which I'm appointed. It's called the Institute for Management and Innovation, or IMI. And, IMI is a concocted organization. I mean, it doesn't know what it's doing. I mean, literally doesn't know what it's doing. Because you've got a bunch of academics running that who have got the word innovation in there. And yet none of them have actually done innovation, let's say, in the private sector, whereas I have. And so I did feel like I had an advantage on that one, only to realize what they were talking about. Like, for example, I was trying to innovate by, kind of creating a new website presence. And that was perceived to be a negative thing because, you were putting the website outside of the university's purview. It was, I think I had it, it was behind a firewall in Denmark. I mean, actually, we had better security than the entire university, right? Because I had a top-notch IT guy working with me, and he said, no, I did some penetration tests, and ours is stronger than theirs. So what are they worried about? Yeah. But of course, that's not really. They would argue that they were worried about accessibility for Ontarians, AODA, and all sorts of. I mean, it's all gaslighting really, because they just didn't feel like they had control. Yeah. Right. And so I think that's where probably senior administrators thought, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. What do we do about it? This guy, Revers, he's kind of driving his own ship, and goodness me, it's a bit innovative. We don't want too much of that, especially not.
How dare he?
Yeah, well, not in the Institute for Management and Innovation, for goodness sake. You better calm him down, better bring him back inside. Right. So I was told that website couldn't continue, and that they were going to, basically shut it down, or it had to be shut down, and they put it back inside the university's shell of terrible websites. And I think anyone at U of T who goes and looks at a U of T website knows that their academic websites are among the least interesting, text-heavy, dull, just awful. Right? And I couldn't bear that. That was really bugging me, because I wanted a polished product. I suppose this is it. What's so interesting about this is that I did think of that program as a kind of a product. I wanted it to be the best product, so I was feeling competitive about it. I wanted it to be really, really good. And of course, they'd hired me on the grounds that this is a profit center for them. Normally, programs are loss makers, right? For universities, and they don't worry about profit and loss, or didn't used to, because the idea was it's universitas, right? You're spreading it around, right? It's a sort of taxation. The money, gets spread around to subjects which would never otherwise be taught. I mean, because they don't have tremendous value for society, not the same kind of economic value. So it's important to have universities that can do that, and support subjects that otherwise, as I say, wouldn't really stand up as being, in a private sector sense. They wouldn't be able to make a profit. So you have some programs that do definitely make a profit, such as this one. Usually the professional programs, and so it is kind of important to be good. And you are actually, as academics, you're stepping into the private sector. I mean, this is the thing. They're really schizophrenic about that. Mm-hmm. They want to be in the private sector because they know there's profit to be made. Yeah. And on the other, like, oh, well, you mustn't kind of like kowtow to these types, these basic types, you mustn't be having your own website or something. So it's really counterintuitive. I mean, it's very paradoxical. So I just became aware of some of this, right? And I just thought, well, I'm just going to press on. And then, to my shock and surprise, I was kind of hauled in to be told that I would be removed, or at least I would be put on leave anyway from my position, because there have been some student complaints. And when I looked at the kind of charge sheet of complaints, they all seemed, to me at least, pretty ridiculous. Yeah. So, I don't talk about those because, the university and I came to an agreement that we'd put that aside. And so we did. I mean, I just agreed to step away from that role. So what was the consequence of that? And by the way, that took about 7 months or something of my life, right? Mm-hmm. So the best bit was that the meeting that I had with the dean, her name's Amrita Danier, and she's retired now, but I remember it quite well. And I remember I was in that meeting with, a witness, a friend of mine actually. His name's Charles, and he's a patent attorney, and he'd come along so that, I had a witness to it. And, he'd sort of piped up and said, I don't understand. Each of these things are, first of all, small in themselves, and they're all to do with Leigh's teaching, but you're removing him from his administrative role, and he's continuing to teach. So it seemed paradoxical, certainly. And that sort of made me think, this isn't the real crime here, right? There's something else going on. They just want me out of that administrative position of influence, and and they can do that. I mean, it's just perfectly. Look, by the way, they're perfectly within their rights to do that, right? They could have just said it a different way, which is we don't like what you're doing, and actually we think, we don't want you doing this anymore. That's what would happen in private sector, right? Like, fine, okay, I'm fired, right, from that position. But it's this sort of like bizarre way that they go about it. It's very, very peculiar. It's like student complaints, really? But that's to do with my teaching, surely. Anyway, so he thought it was a bit odd. And I remember, the dean saying something like, well, it's the intersection you see. And I'd never heard, I think those were her words. It's the intersection you see. The intersection between the charge sheet of little items, the microaggressions, if you will, and so on. And I thought, what is this intersection business? So you can imagine I was completely hoodwinked. Yeah. I had no expectation. This was the day before my 53rd birthday.
Unreal. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
How have you noticed the shift in the sentiment of the student body? I know that you talk a little bit about how it's the administration that's kind of pushing a lot of the change that we're seeing in university, the cultural, the ideological kind of, like we said, corruption of universities. But you're teaching these students, and I'm thinking when you first started out, you wouldn't necessarily have some of these ridiculous problems that we seem to have today. But now, when you let's say try to organize a social event where you do that street epistemology, kind of game that Boghossian made.
Yeah, the Boghossian thing.
The student body now seems a little bit more far gone. It's harder to relate to them.
I think we have to break this up. There's quite a lot to look at here. It's tempting to say unpack. I think that gets overused too. Yeah. Right? Oh, we're going to unpack this subject. It's like, what is it? It's in a backpack? No, it's that's a lot of unpacking. Yeah. Because there's a lot of things going on here. I think there are a couple of things, right, that I would focus on, and we'll talk about the student sort of attitudes. But the first is I think pretty incontrovertible, and that is the university's need to make this into a business. Right. So education is now a business, and all businesses that are successful generally, I would think, correct me if I'm wrong, would focus on the client experience.
Right. Yeah.
And so the client experience is the student experience. And so if students need something and they declare that they need some support in some fashion or other, it is tempting, therefore, for the administrators to provide because the customer's asking for it. So I don't blame the university in that sense. I kind of blame them for treating education like a business. Right. So that actually puts me into the sort of left-wing camp. Right? All the socialists think that this should all be free. Yeah. And that because it's free, you don't get to dictate as a student what your experience is going to be like. Right? Yeah, because you're not buying it. Right. It's being given to you. Yeah. And that's actually how I was trained. Yeah. I didn't pay to go to university, amazingly, in the UK in that era, in the 80s and 90s. It was paid for. And ironically, that was during Margaret Thatcher's era. Right. And she was like right wing. So
now, was that a special case for you, or did this
no, everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
It's pretty much you won a place to university, and what happened was your local authority would pay for you to go, right? Which probably sounds astonishing to listeners, right? If they think about how their experience is to be dragged into debt.
Yeah.
Right, you're borrowing money. So they're customers, right? And those customers, by the way, are going in debt in order to buy this thing, which is even worse, right? I mean, okay, so the wealthy have the money already, but a lot of people are going into debt. So from the flip side, the university sort of encourages, well, we need to satisfy our students, therefore, because they're customers. And so there is a temptation to provide all these services, right? So that starts to happen. So those services might be, things like guidance counseling and, to start with. And then it might be, helping them to deal with what they perceive to be disabilities of one sort or another. Yeah, which might be real or imagined.
Yeah, I've heard you speak about that. Accommodations.
Yeah, accommodations, particularly the accommodations have ballooned, right, in recent years. Yeah. And then, students are not foolish. They think, well, hang on, this is, I mean, like, if everybody's doing it, I'm going to try to do it too. I mean, you can't blame students for, especially if they're told that perhaps they get a lot of anxiety, that they might want to seek some sort of concession for that.
Yeah.
I'd do it. But then who gets to decide? It certainly isn't the professors, by the way. They don't get to decide. So the university then has a raft of people that it's employed, so more money. They've got to pay the salaries of these people whose job it is to assess whether students need an accommodation. And then when they decide they do, then they issue a diktat to someone like me, and I'm told I have to give the person twice as long on an examination. Right? I don't get to choose. I just have to do that. So it's always, every single one of these accommodations is more time on the examination.
Right. Yeah.
That should be a red flag to anyone.
You did talk about that with the Awake at the Wheel guys, and they were saying how
that's a red flag.
The lady there, she was partially blind, I think she was saying, and you're telling how, okay, well, if someone's partially blind, it's not necessarily obvious that the solution is to give you more time. Perhaps the test has to be written in Braille. Perhaps we need to make it a bigger font, more pages, but to just immediately, draw it down to more time.
Always more time.
As a crutch, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think so. You look at the data and you just go, hold on, shouldn't there be a distribution of things?
Yeah.
Right? And there isn't. It's like 99.9% of the time. And I've had hundreds of accommodations over the years. So there's the accommodation. So there's all of that that's going on, right? So the administration, the university, the operators that kind of smooth things through and make the university happen, if you like, they are incentivized to satisfy students, right? I know that sounds better. Students will go, really? But it's true. And then the students, they think, well, actually, I deserve this. Right, and of course, if one university is doing it, then another university has to do it in order to compete.
Right, yeah.
Right, so everyone's got to compete. So we're into this competitive market now, where it's like, Queen's is doing this, and Queen's is offering, 25% of students are getting accommodations. Well, we need to kind of keep up with that, right? So you've got almost like a competitive sense to that. I think that's all rather worrying, because then, of course, this erodes standards. So. But what are student attitudes like? Well, so I think there's obviously, I mean, you've heard this perhaps 100,000 or 1,000 times, the levels of entitlement, right? Well, customers do feel entitled. So I don't blame that. If I go to a classy restaurant, as I did once upon a time late last year with Jordan Peterson, strangely enough, of course it's a classy restaurant because Peterson goes to classy restaurants. You know that, well, this meal is costing a lot of money, and if it's not very good, I'm going to be disappointed, right. And I'm going to say something. Well, you should say something. I mean, Canadians are very polite, though, so they find it hard to say anything. I've noticed that. But if you're British like me, oh, no. It's like, no, how was your meal? Actually, I found this was not quite... You know when in Toronto, they always ask you about 30 seconds after the plate has arrived, how are the first few bites? And I haven't lifted my fork yet. I'll get back to you on that. But I mean, the reason is because they want to get your feedback, and you should want to give it, and because it's a trade, right? You're getting food for money. Well, isn't everything like that? When you order your brand new iPhone, you expect it to be immaculate. It doesn't help that Apple and companies like that have made it almost like, the packaging porn that they have, right? It's like when you're unwrapping one of these things, it's like, wow, it's perfect. Yeah. It is utterly perfect. And then this pristine object that is all yours, and you get to, and your whole life's going to be on it. How exciting. If it wasn't like that, you'd be upset. If it was scratched when it came out, you'd be immediately down to get an exchange, right? So there's no reason why students shouldn't feel the same way about their education, really. They're paying all this money, they're going into debt, and they want it to be a perfect experience. And what does that mean? Well, it means getting A's, surely. Yeah. It means getting a pristine record. Isn't that what shouldn't we all get that? Right. But of course, that's not really how it works. So I found that there was this sense of entitlement, that because, and quite rightly perhaps, but it doesn't work in the context of education. Mm-hmm. And so after all of this cancellation business, so what had happened to me was essentially I was sent away. I didn't get my stipend any longer. So they would, academics get paid a stipend which is a modest amount of money for doing an administrative task, right? Because they hate doing administration, like I said. So the university kind of bribes them into it. You might get $10,000 a year or something, or whatever, or $20,000 if you're lucky, which sounds like a lot, but most profs are making $150,000, so it's incremental, and they're paying the top rate of tax, so they're only going to make half of that anyway. So, and it's an awful lot of work, right? So there was I, having been sort of tossed out of my administrative job. I didn't get the stipend any longer, but I still got, rather generous 6-figure salary, and suddenly I had 2/3 to 3/4 of my time back.
Yeah.
And once you've got to the point as an academic in teaching where you've established all your courses, teaching those courses is really quite straightforward. It's quite routine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the marking and all of that, which is always boring. But you kind of lined it up. So suddenly you've got an autopilot career. And I've got all this time. What am I going to do? So, of course, I looked around and started thinking what I could do. And one of the things I did was watch a lot of podcasts. That's how I came across Peter Boghossian and his Spectrum Street epistemology. And I thought it was brilliant. I was like, wow, this is great. I was fascinated by that. And of course, it's his reaction to voices being shut down, right? This no debate sort of climate that seems to have emerged, particularly on campuses. And that was reflected.
I'm just going to check the camera real quick. Sorry. We'll get right back. You want to keep talking?
Yeah. I mean, that was reflecting on, I guess, the culture that had crept across campuses, that, there was a morally upstanding sort of set of values. There's one side to this. There was no debate to be had almost. That debate could be kind of denied in a number of topics where clearly debate was necessary, right? There were a lot of topics which, people dispute what is the correct path or direction to go, right? I mean, we could talk about any number of those. And so what had begun to happen is, particularly in American campuses and in Canada too, academics had begun to be censored, right? They were uninvited or deplatformed or something along those lines. They would be, you'd have groups of students who'd protest over a subject. And at Peterson, Jordan Peterson is a good example, right? Because there was that pronouns thing that came up. Was it
Bill C-16?
Bill C-16. Yeah. And he was instantly classified as outright, all these things. And of course I thought, well, he must be outright. He must be a complete nightmarish person. And by the way, he's not. He's an absolutely delightful man of, immaculate manners. You couldn't, it's extraordinary when you realize how wrong you were.
Yeah. He calls himself a classical liberal, just like you do.
Yeah. Well, he is. And he'll discuss topics. He'll listen, which is amazing.
Of course.
Right? He'll react to what you have to say. And he's an absolute sweetheart when, he remembers my name when I see him and he's, oh, how are things? And he's extremely capable in his human interactions, as far as I can tell anyway.
Absolutely.
So that's the truth of the matter, right? Now, and I think he'll give anyone a platform to talk. He would have a conversation with anyone, even his worst enemies. So certainly, but obviously I'm more aligned with him now, much more aligned, but I wasn't when I heard about that Bill C-16. And I thought, who's this crazy professor who's, got people shouting at him in the street, essentially, wasn't it? They were outside a building somewhere.
Right outside of the Arts and Science building.
Was that where it was?
Yeah, Sydney Smith.
Yeah, that went sort of viral, didn't it? And then, so, I've been sort of a blip. When did that happen, do you know?
That was 2016, I believe.
Yeah, so before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was still pretty oblivious. Of course, I hadn't been cancelled at that point. But so it was a good deal. It's a number of years before my cancellation. Yeah, okay. So of course you just sort of, it's craziness, whatever. But in looking back, in learning about people like Peter Boghossian and then Jordan Peterson and a variety of other podcasters, it opened up a new world. And then I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could do some of the street epistemology, and then and on our campus, and then an opportunity arose, the department. So my chemistry department, because I'm in 2 departments, so the chemistry department decided they were going to host an event for students, a social event, an evening event for students, and they asked faculty to come up with ideas for activities, because we've got to have something to do. And so I thought, this is brilliant. We can do street epistemology. And yeah, sure, I mean, some of the things might be contentious, but what I'll do is I'll put together a bunch of claims, and I'll start from really kind of anodyne ones, and we'll move up progressively as people get into the swing of things. That was the idea. I wasn't going to start with something outrageous. And so I did. I think I started with something very simple on that occasion. So I remember setting it up. I had to get the IT guys to roll in a big TV screen, and a mic, like mics like this, the handheld mics, and then I'd be Peter Boghossian essentially, and I'd kind of have the lines on the ground. And the idea is then you have these different response lines, right? You're either neutral to a claim, or you agree or disagree, and you can strongly agree or strongly disagree, and so on. So I think it's like a Likert scale, right? And so we'd invite people to come and play in the group, and initially I got 1 or 2 people. I mean, because people are nervous, right? And I think the first claims were pretty anodyne, as I said. They were like of the order of being a vegan is morally superior to being a vegetarian, something like that. It's a claim. Do you agree or disagree? And we went down those sorts of paths. One of them was, I think, in fact, the one that I was cited as, the whole thing, it all turned apparently transphobic. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Like almost instantaneously, the whole place. People were there having fun at this point, and we were 5, 6, 7, 8 maybe claims in, and then I come to the Jordan Peterson requires media training, right? Which was reflecting on what was happening to him at the time, about this whole thing with the Ontario College of Psychologists or whatever it is.
What a scam that was.
Yeah, well, right. See, that's a good one. And I thought this is very topical. And let's face it, we're at university, and we're at the top university, or so U of T keeps telling us, top university in Canada. What better place to have a debate, by the way, amongst scientists,
of course,
right, who are great at this sort of thing. And as soon as his name came up, then it's like the red flags, or even the sirens sound. Now, I mean, I wasn't stopped immediately. And we had people on both sides of that argument, right? And I would go back and forth to people on different lines and ask them what they thought, and why they thought the things they did, and I didn't express an opinion. So it was the game that Boghossian does. It's exactly the same template. And I thought it was getting really good, actually, because we got more and more people wanting to play. You know how these things go, right? People go, oh, actually, I want to have a say on this. 100%. So we had loads of people on different lines. I think there were too many people to the point where you couldn't possibly ask them all what they thought. And some of them were pretty divisive after a point. But when I say divisive, because people on the far extremes, right? Like strongly disagree or strongly agree. And this is a great way for people to explore what they think, right? So I thought it was really successful, and I don't think anyone was objecting at that point. And in fact, once we started getting into some of the things that, really get people going, I just remember how strident some of the advocates were. So like the turning point, the major next turning point after the Peterson one was men can become women. It's a claim. Men can become women. True, false, don't know, neutral, disagree, agree, and so on. And I remember there were a bunch of largely females on the strongly agree. And I went over and said to them, they were really, it was like they wanted to snatch the microphone off me because they were so keen to tell the world. Because, when I look back, I think, oh, right, they're almost religious. There was almost a sort of cult-like sort of passion behind that. And I mean, I tend to disagree. I don't think men can become women, and that makes me transphobic, apparently. But anyway, but I didn't say that. I just handed them the mic, and I asked them, well, explain to me why you think that. And they regurgitated some stuff that by then I'd become familiar with, which is all the queer theory. It's just basically a bunch of neo-Marxism actually repackaged, right? Yeah. Which is all about blurring boundaries, very postmodern. There's blurring boundaries. It's also about
subjective realities.
Yeah, it's about subjective realities, relativism. Yeah. It's about definitions changing. So there's a sort of word game thing going on there too, which is also totally postmodern, right? Yeah. Imbuing new meanings into words. That's sex and gender. It's all performative, which is just a claim. I mean, but a lot of. I would say a lot of it is performative, right? It was that there were social aspects to what make us behave these ways, in male and female and stuff. I get it, but there's also a deep scientific, biological underpinning as well.
Of course.
So they were using all of those angles, and I thought, okay, well, I've stumbled into this, But then you would go and talk to people on the other side who, obviously, from a scientific perspective, thought, well, you've got XY chromosomes or XX chromosomes, and really that dictates whether you're male or female. You can't really change that. I mean, it's just kind of just an impossibility. Certainly right now with today's technology, you've got 2 trillion cells in your body, and nearly all of them are going to have XY. Yeah. How are we going to change all of that? This is great. But then I was happy for that to get to that point. But then I was told, this would be the last one or something, and so I had to stop because one of my colleagues, this absurdly woke colleague of mine, actually, when I think about it, you clearly didn't feel comfortable. I mean, he was busy playing Snap with some of the other students. I mean, like, wow. I mean, okay, or there was coloring books on one of the tables.
You talked about the infantilization of education.
I mean, seriously. I mean, it is. I mean, you couldn't make this up, right?
It's unbelievable,
right? These kids, and I'm going to call them kids now,
yeah,
right? Because clearly they are kids.
Yeah.
These kids are paying all this money so that they can have a social event on a university campus, so they can color in coloring books that you could have given to a 5-year-old.
Unbelievable.
That is infantilization. So right there.
I can speak on that fact too, because in the residence buildings at Victoria College, at least, every year, like, the different floors will have a different theme, let's say, for the decoration of their floors. I kid you not. So many of these themes, it feels like they're trying to bring us back to like primary school.
Correct.
You have whether it's like a kids video game, or they had Care Bears as one of them. It's like, this is unbelievable.
No, it's like you've stumbled into a fantasy universe.
Yeah.
Right. And then that led me down this path as well, because there's more to it. Right. I realized there's more to it even than that. So I'd done this event. I'd gotten into trouble. And the reason I knew I was in trouble, because I was called into the chair's office now. Not the dean, but the chair now. And the chair at the time was Professor Lindsay Shanebaum, and she was chair for a number of years. Very successful chair in many respects, very well liked. I didn't know a great deal about her, really. We'd had a number of interactions, because faculty have to have conversations with the chair to decide what courses they're going to teach. But I'd had this one encounter that preceded this street epistemology event. And in fact, at that previous event, it'd been the beginnings of my writings for the National Post. I think it was my first article. And at that event, it was an event about Islamophobia, I think, on campus. And I'd gone along because I wanted to learn about what they were teaching people about Islamophobia. And at the end of it, there was some discussion, and I remember having a conversation with her, and she pointed out how she recognized her own privilege. And after now I look at it today, I go, my God, this is like maximum virtue signaling, isn't it? To make a declaration of, I recognize my own white privilege. Yeah. It's, look at me, I'm better than you, because I'm white too, right? And she's white, and she even went on to say, you have privilege, Leigh. I can tell by just looking at you. Whoa.
That's something to say.
Whoa. Yeah. I mean, that is quite the accusation, isn't it? I mean, she doesn't know about my background. She doesn't know that I'm actually from a blue-collar background.
Yeah.
She doesn't know that I won a scholarship to go to private school purely on merit and not because I'm from a wealthy family.
Yeah.
There's this idea, I think, amongst colleagues, they think I'm wealthy. And there's some truth to that because my family made money in my grandfather's era. But they're all entrepreneurs, you see, and it's all sort of self-made. It's not like inherited wealth of the aristocratic sort.
Yeah.
And it's a modest fortune, I think. I mean, it was, so, I mean, there was always this sense of, oh, Leigh's high on the hog or something. And not only that, I mean, we can tell by just looking at him. And I have gone to public school, which translated means private school. I know this is confusing. In England, public school is private school. But I'd got the voice, I suppose. And I'd gone to Oxford, right? So, I mean, I had all the credentials, right, to make it a fairly accurate description. Oh, you've got privilege and I can tell. Right. But it's actually inaccurate, and it doesn't really reflect on, my mother's family, and they came up from poverty and worked in factories during the war and after the war. It's really misleading. And at what point, okay, I definitely have had privileges in my life, right? But just to say you have privilege, and I can tell by just looking at you, when you don't know what proportion, some of it might have been pure privilege, but what proportion of it is earned? Right? Do I have an aptitude? Did I work hard for these things? Do you know that by just looking at me? Yeah. Because I felt like I worked damn hard. I was the first member of my family to go to university, right? So to have someone like that, a middle-class, white, female academic telling you these things to your face, didn't put me on a good footing with her anyway, I don't think. I mean, I thought, my God, ideologically, this is not, I just don't feel right about this. Yeah. I feel oppressed now. It's ironic, isn't it? So when she called me into that meeting, she basically accused me of being a transphobe, right? That's essentially what it came down to, that I was a transphobe. Or at least, she didn't say that, okay? It's not fair for me to say that. She didn't say I made the department look transphobic.
Yeah. I read in an article that, I don't know if it was this particular meeting with her or if it was with a different lady, but there was an encounter with somebody, I feel like it was her, where they were basically talking down to you in a sense that it was like, we can stop pretending, both, was this her?
Yes, that's her.
Yeah, we both know what you did. You stepped over
a
line.
Yeah, I stepped over a line. We both know what you did. Well, but you see, we did both know what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I intentionally did what I did.
Yeah.
I wanted to push boundaries. I wanted students to address these topics. I don't think that's why. She looks at it and says he's a shit disturber.
Right.
Yeah. He's an academic terrorist, and we need to stamp that out.
Stifle that
immediately. He's a troublemaker.
Of course, and this is the spirit. This is the masculine spirit that's being repressed in university.
Correct. Yeah. So you get onto that point.
Absolutely.
It's feminization. So I agree. I mean, yeah, I am a troublemaker.
Yeah.
Because, look, you can go to university and have all of the threatening and potentially offensive things removed from your universe, and you think that's going to make you strong. Right. This is the anti-fragility concept. I really espouse this. No, you've got to challenge.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm right on any of these topics, which is why, by the way, there are always claims. Yeah. Right. I'm simply saying you cannot not face truth.
Right.
Or at least or debate issues and to find the truth. Right. That's just foolish. You came to university in order to be challenged. And if you came for some other reason, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah, I agree.
That would be my perspective on university. And if we don't stick to that, university ceases to be as important as it once was.
It ceases to be university.
So, yeah.
And Jordan Peterson speaks on this absolutely. And in his his starting phases when there was huge protests, riots, even at some of his lectures and some of the talks he'd give. There was a case where one of the protesters was saying, like, this is our home. They had a sign like, this is our home, not in our home. No room for hate speech in our home. Right. And he goes on, he talks to Joe Rogan about how the university is not a home. University is not a home. A home is meant to, like, an intellectual safe space is not, you're not going to find that, or at least you shouldn't find that at university. Of course, your physical safety, we should protect that. Of course, we set up, campus security to make sure there aren't drugged out homeless people roaming through and causing havoc. But in terms of an intellectual safe space, I talked about this with Rhonda McEwen, the president of Vic, and I was basically saying I was a little bit more, soft. I didn't try to push too hard and be as provocative with her because I didn't want to, get into useless conversations or useless debates that, might upset somebody. And these are things that, we need to have. They're very important, but there was a lot of other topics I didn't necessarily want to completely just throw her off and get her angry. But no, I can go as far as I want.
It's funny you mentioned Rhonda McEwen because she was. I have a bone to pick with her in some senses.
Yeah,
I had a nice conversation with her one day when my car was parked next to hers in the parking lot at the campus. She had a nice car and I have a nice car, and it's one of those things that a very privileged thing to do, isn't it? But there is a sort of a thing that you do when cars are part of your life, which they are for me. And we had this conversation. And I always thought, she's a very nice person. And she became dean, and I was like, oh, this is great, And, I must admit, she was a black female in a position of very significant power and influence. Fantastic. We want to see more of that if it's merit-based. And, but unfortunately, she left after 12 months. I'd heard noises that, people weren't entirely happy with her as dean. I don't know.
The dean of UTM.
Yeah. I don't know the truth of that, but certainly, she went onwards and upwards, I guess, and so she became president, right, of one of the colleges,
Victoria
College. But you see, the reason I have a bone to pick in a way is, I think she was supposed to stay for 4 years, and she was there for 1, and so of course they had to have an interim dean, and it was the interim dean that presided over my case. So maybe things would have been different if Rhonda had been dean. She might have been a bit more sympathetic to me. But anyway, yes, I do think that universities need to closely pay attention to the fact that they could destroy their own mission.
Of course.
By shutting down these conversations. Now, look, I want to give fair representation to Lindsay Schoenbaum, because the chair of chemistry, because she said, we can have these conversations, right? We can have these conversations, the kind of conversations you want to have, but it has to be in the right place, and this was the wrong place.
Yeah, trigger warnings.
Yeah. So this was a sort of set of judgments here. Who's she to say that?
Yeah.
Right? The whole point is, because she feels that in these topic areas that people need preparation because they might feel uncomfortable, so they need to go prepared. But were we to have had actually a debate on, let's say, trans issues and whether men could become women, and that was the sole focus, that would become a whole debate, we'd have been shut down.
Right.
There'd be that gives them time to protest, which means you wouldn't have ended up having any kind of discussion. It would have just been an event which would have been reported as transphobic professor tries to, and we successfully shut him down.
Yeah.
Whereas slipping it into a game where there's clearly a progression, by the way, as the claims get more and more maybe divisive, a little bit more edgy.
Yeah.
Of course, that's more exciting.
Of course.
Right? They're adults, right? These people can vote.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should be trying to protect them. And so it leads to that point that you just alluded to, the feminization of the university administration in particular. Now, university has become feminized anyway because there are more women enrolled in university now as students than there are men.
Yeah.
And that's a reversal from historical norms, obviously, and I think it's a good thing that we have more women in the university. It's very important. I got criticized for criticizing that there were more women than men going to university, because I think the argument was, yeah, but it's kind of payback time for when there were more men than women. But I didn't think that was good then either.
Yeah.
Right? Like when I was a man at university, okay, so I'm gay, yeah, so maybe I wasn't, worried about dating, but all my straight friends, of which I had many, were. And it was like, well, dating's hard work because there aren't very many women, right, to be found on the campus, right, because it's very male-centric. So they were complaining about it then. And now kind of the reverse is going to be true. The girls are going to be complaining because there aren't enough boys. We want it to be roughly 50-50, don't we? We want representation. So even among the student body, there's now substantially more girls than boys. But I don't think that's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the administration is largely run by women and not men. And it's twice as many women as men on average, according to Heather McDonald, who's written about this. And I think that leads into these behaviors, which is the sort of gender traits or sex, it's sex traits, isn't it, in terms of behavior? There's like, men tend to be a bit more aggressive. They're, kind of, I would say, naturally a little bit more competitive or challenging. Doesn't mean, women aren't also competitive, but on the average, I think. And then you've got women are more nurturing and emotionally kind of in touch. I mean, men are often kind of goofy when it comes to emotions, right? And completely out of touch and, unempathic. Yeah. So if you shift one way or the other again, those traits get amplified. So there is this tendency to do a lot of hand-holding, sort of maternalistic kind of approach to students, to be extremely... it would be what Gad Saad refers to as suicidal empathy, right? Sort of pathological.
That's a great phrase, yeah.
Yeah, he's nailed it, hasn't he? I think it's just spot on.
Yeah.
So you've got this sort of pathologizing, if you like, of the administration. So those who govern and in the university are driving it in this direction, and so we're coddling students, and that's not good for students. Right? They might feel it's that thing about in the short term you feel good.
Yeah.
In the long term you don't. I always think of it like going to the gym. When you don't want to go to the gym and you wake up and you think, I don't want to work out today. I'm so fed up. Why do I have to do that? I'm not going to do this. And if you don't go to the gym that day, you think, oh well, I got I didn't do it, and it was great. But the long term is you lose. Yeah. Right. But if you force yourself to do it, boy, do you feel better afterwards.
Of course.
Right. So this anti-fragility, weight training is a good example of anti-fragility, right? You get stronger by putting yourself through some pain and agony. And I think university needs to be like that intellectually.
Absolutely.
So we're making a mistake by always, number one, giving concessions at the slightest inclination. Have more time in the exam. Oh, don't worry about this. Or try to, let's reevaluate that paper that you submitted because you didn't get the mark you didn't want. And the people who will suffer the most are those who graduate from university having been treated this way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And people in my generation won't, because we were treated like I remember, like, you're not happy with this at Oxford University?
Yeah.
Don't come back.
Yeah.
You're more than welcome not to show up next term.
Absolutely.
They didn't care.
And it hurts the whole student body for career prospects as well. This is something that I talk about with some of my friends, and it's just the fact that the university, obviously, we can tell it's becoming a little bit more, anti-capitalist, more Marxist leaning, some of these professors.
No, I don't know. I think it's always been that way.
You think it's always been that way? Okay, interesting. Well, I think it's very visible, at least now.
Yeah.
It's very clear, and it's out in the open. And the fact that, employers who are the people with the jobs, right? Who are the people with the jobs? It's capitalists. It's not Marxists that have jobs to give out.
No, they don't.
So why are they going to look at University of Toronto
because
as an institution?
Because they don't understand their true mission. They don't believe really that they're here to make students employable.
Right.
They're here to indoctrinate students.
Yeah.
In a way of thinking, into a utopian belief system.
Yeah.
That's what they're to do.
Yeah.
The majority. I joined U of T to get students good jobs.
Yeah.
That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to give them an opportunity to springboard into an industry which I think is really interesting, the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, which is very capitalist, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm a capitalist, certainly. But it doesn't mean I don't have an awareness of social values. I just think it's quite crazy how, cultural Marxism is just everywhere in universities. It's just absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
And I remember one professor, his name's Mikhail Tombak, and I always admired him. He's a very knowledgeable fella and teaches strategy at the Rotman School. So, kind of a really hot topic area, I'd say, really, important, isn't it, strategy? And I remember a conversation he and I had where he said, yeah, Leigh, you've got to watch these Marxists in the dean's office. And the fact that he used the word Marxists? Really? But he's absolutely right. And I learned that afterwards. Yeah. It is, well, of course, hey, capitalist wouldn't even exist if it weren't for Marx, right? Because Das Kapital and all of this, right? So really, he's the one that defined capitalism. But yeah, I mean, we are in Canada. This is a G7 nation. It's it's a developed country. It's a rich country, still just about. And people are going to go into the workplace and they're going to be held to account for performance, one would hope. Certainly, their earning potential is usually going to be tied to performance, unless you go and work for the government. Right. I mean, maybe that's what universities want to do. They're just going to educate people to go and work for the government, and if the government balloons, there's lots of jobs in government, and incompetence is a standard thing. Yeah. Point to a competent government agency anywhere, yeah. Right? Point me to one, and that's what we're seeing the fallout from now in the US, right? I did wonder about that, with this Doge business that Elon Musk has embarked on, Department of Government Efficiency, and they're finding billions of dollars of savings, yep. And he's hoping to save up to $1 trillion a year with cuts of all this sort of wasteful and fraudulent activity. And I wonder how much of that is really going on in Canada.
Right. Yeah, we need that in Canada, absolutely.
Right. I mean, let's face it, if it's happening in the US, it's happening here.
Surely.
So yeah, of course, and that instantly makes it very political right now because we're about to go into an election. Mm-hmm. And I don't get to vote, right? So I'm not a Canadian. I vote in the UK. I'm a British citizen. I have right of permanent residence here, but I don't vote. So it's up to you guys, yeah, to make a decision. I think it's probably the most important electoral decision in a generation.
Yeah. Who would have your vote today?
Well, I'd have to vote for Polyev. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with all the policies, but I don't know enough about Canadian politics in general, I think. Perhaps. I just wouldn't vote for more of the same.
Right. Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
It might be a short, sharp shock treatment. A lot of people... I'm perfectly okay to be critical of Trump, but I still think we need Trump, mm-hmm. right? Because Bidenomics was a disaster. Yeah. And so I think the same thing. I think if you have a fourth... okay, so here's my prediction. It's very easy. I think it was a lot easier for someone from outside who doesn't have a particular stake. Remember, my partner's Canadian, but a particular stake in terms of it's not my country still. It's to give you my opinion and what I could project, and probably people will laugh, but I think this is existential for Canada. And the simple reason is that you have a history where you've been trying to keep these provinces together, and we know that, certainly with Quebec and separatism. And that's something I can relate to because in Britain, Tony Blair's government basically devolved the four nations, and that was really not a success. So now we have a Welsh Assembly and a Scottish Assembly and so on. And so they've sort of broken up. I mean, we're still under the umbrella of the United Kingdom, but there's this devolution that's happened. I could see that happening in Canada. I could certainly see Saskatchewan or Alberta getting so fed up with these equalization payments that they're forced to make. The federal government redistributing things, the cash over to mostly to Quebec, isn't it? I think 13 billion or something like that a year. Mm-hmm. They just and then the tariffs, and then Trump making these sort of cooing noises about come join us, that they might, right? They might. And if that did happen, that would be existential crisis for Canada, right?
Of course. And
so what you've got is, from my understanding, is that you've got the Laurentian elite, this sort of, I don't know, I mean, again, we talk to oppressor and oppressed.
Yeah.
We could talk about that, couldn't we? We could say the Laurentian elite is the oppressor here, and that the average Canadian out in Alberta or Saskatchewan or Manitoba or something, they're being sort of oppressed by this governance, this endless liberal kind of mandate. Admittedly, the last one wasn't a majority, right? But yeah, I just wonder, ultimately, Canadians could wake up and say, you know what, it doesn't make us any less Canadian, right? I mean, I don't see. It depends where your loyalties lie. Do you see what I mean? I mean, I'm still English, but that makes me British as well. Yeah. But I'm English first, and I could see that. If I was Albertan, I don't. Say, well, we're part of the United States now. But culturally, it'd still be Canadian. Right. Depends what you really mean. I mean, how important is the flag to, would you hang on? Don't they have their own provincial flags anyway? Yeah. I mean, I just think it could. It's a bigger risk than you think, because that border is a ruled line that some Brit, I can't know, it was the British, wasn't it? Just like across the whole continent. It's completely fabricated.
That's right.
It doesn't follow it much in the way of geographic logic, right? Yeah. I mean, so yeah. I mean, I wonder. I mean, I don't want Canada to be assimilated by the US. I think
you make a good argument. You make a good point, or you raise a good question at least.
Well, it's Canadians have to decide, right? It's just stop voting for these deluded, elites.
Yeah.
These are the people with all the money, and they think all the privilege. There you go. They have all the privilege. And they dictate how this country goes, and have done for like a decade now. Yeah. And it's been disastrous. The other thing is, look at the economic readout on this. Right? What was it? GDP per capita increased 1.4% over the decade or something. Yeah. It was like, well, better. Was it the only one that's worse is Liechtenstein? Amongst developed countries? Are you serious? Poland's at about 46% or something. Canada's desperately poorly performing right now in a country which is huge and has enormous natural resources, and every Canadian should be like Dubai, right? Or a United Arab Emirates or something, where everyone here is completely wealthy and they should be handed vast sums of money.
Yeah.
Isn't that how it works out there in some parts of the Middle East? I mean, basically all the citizens just get massive amounts of money on their 21st birthday or whatever. Everyone's rich. Why are Canadians not rich?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any sense. There's only 42 million of you.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 70 million people in Britain on a tiny island that's small. It's like, was it about the size smaller than Newfoundland?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so I don't get it.
And Jordan Peterson's talked about how Ontario now is poorer than the poorest state in the U.S.
Right. Yeah, Ontario. Yeah, isn't that crazy? The richest province in all of Canada per capita is poorer than the poorest state in the U.S., and that's Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
Wow. So there's something got to change.
Yeah.
No, but I'm pro Canada. I just want them to make the right decision. I just want, give Poilievre a chance.
Yeah.
Right. Some people say he's a mini Trump. I don't see that. I think he's, to be honest, far more grounded Trump is a bit of a loose cannon, isn't he? And you don't really know what he's going to do, and it's part of his psychology of deal making, seemingly, to wrong foot everybody every 5 minutes and change the rules, move the goalposts, and it's exhausting, right? I can see that. I don't think Poilievre's like that at all. When I saw that Jordan Peterson long form podcast he did with Poilievre, I thought he came across extremely well in the long form, right? And the long form's a good way to see people in truth, isn't it? That's why that's changed everything too. You know, the Joe Rogans and the idea that, I mean, Kamala Harris didn't have a chance in that sense, of course, right? Yeah. So I don't know. Will Mark Carney sit down and do a long form podcast and keep people awake for 3 hours, or is that possible? Yeah. I don't know. So for my own part, anyway, I mean, look, that's all a bit. I mean, I did some of these. You know, I was an academic terrorist for a little bit, I suppose, if that's such a thing. I thought I'd write an article about that. I was looking to decolonize my organic chemistry course. I thought that'd be interesting. You know, I mean, people who know organic chemistry might know that's quite a challenge. Yeah. You know, all the organic chemists I know are white men. It's, you know, in the past. I mean, we have a history littered with white men, so it's going to be tricky to decolonize all of that, because presumably it's oppressive. Presumably it's patriarchal and colonial and all sorts of, you know, might as well just don't do organic chemistry then, right? Because I don't think I can decolonize it. But I thought, but we have some really oppressive kind of routines. Like we tend to categorize molecules based on handedness, right? They're left-handed or right-handed. Well, that's not representative. I don't know what proportion of the population is left-handed, but it's certainly not 50-50, is it? And molecules tend to be 50-50, and, you know, in these mixtures. So it's kind of insulting to people who are right-handed or left-handed, perhaps, so they can be insulted by that. You know, how are we going to deal with that? They need their safe spaces. What do you do when you start talking about handedness of molecules for people who don't have hands? Like that's a bit unfair. You're talking about hands; they don't have hands. I mean, like, you know. So I mean, you could go to the most ridiculous extremes, right? So there's some funny oppressive language in organic chemistry. We tend to talk about cis and trans. Yeah. Whoa. I mean, you know, you can imagine people's heads just exploding. Yeah. I'm going to talk about alkene geometric isomers, cis and trans. They're called. I'm like, what? How dare you? Well, we've been using that for a long time, right? Now you're going to tell me, I can't use trans, or is it some sort of oppression? So I thought that was sort of funny that, you know, I sit down and come up with some sort of comic. Well, not comic. I mean, just an attempt to decolonize. That would be funny. So I had a go at that, actually. Might write about it, and then. You know, more
replace this battery.
Yeah, sorry, I've talked too much.
No, you're good.
I think in the end, you have to follow your heart. I always enjoyed teaching students. I always wanted to communicate, particularly the passion I had for my subject, organic chemistry. I think it's a tremendous subject. I know that a lot of people find it very, very challenging, extremely difficult. There's a lot of factors at play, things to remember when trying to understand how molecules work, how they interact with each other, how reactions take place. That was something that I was always excited about, and I've really enjoyed my time teaching that subject. But, you know, there's a point where you realize you're fighting a losing battle.
Yeah.
There's no way that I can change the way University of Toronto is going. I mean, the number of things that are going on which double down on essentially what is a bunch of gaslighting, DEI initiatives, constant attempts to indoctrinate faculty and staff into a way of thinking, sort of taking the moral high ground, amplifying divisiveness, making people like you and me think about race all the time when I never thought once about it, to the point where I think, oh my God, you know, now I'm doing it. This is not surprisingly, because I've been alerted to it constantly. They had an event recently. Was it International Day for Eradication of Racism or something like that? Yeah, I mean, it has the I can't remember precisely what the acronym stands for, but it's IDERD, IDERD, IDERD. It even sounds stupid.
Yeah.
IDERD. It sounds like something that Homer Simpson might say.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is really not great marketing going on here, because you're going to have a room full of people who have about the intellectual capacity of Homer Simpson, being told, how to, eradicate racism in their own lives, or at least to identify, racism that probably isn't even in there. It's not there.
Yeah.
They're seeing things where they aren't. These people are, well, first of all, they're promulgating a religion. The religion doesn't really live on evidence at all. It relies on belief, on some tenets of belief that are pretty fundamental, and it's faith, right? Evidence denies faith, so we can't have evidence for these things. It is, as I say, very divisive. I think it amplifies division between groups, makes people think about this stuff all the time. I'm a champion for equity, but not the equity that they think.
Right.
So I guess actually it's just that word, isn't it? I'm a champion of equality, and they use equity. Equity really is a word pinched from finance, right? When you talk about I've got equity in an asset like a property or in a company.
Equity essentially meaning equality of outcome.
Yes,
instead of equality of opportunity.
Yeah, that's essentially what they've used it to mean. Yeah, I mean they were sort of interchangeable for a while.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's how the postmodernists get ahead, right? Because it's this sort of Mott and Bailey approach to words, which is they have multiple meanings, and some of the meanings everyone how could you object? That's the Mott, I think. That's the sort of low hanging fruit, if you will, and then everyone goes yeah, and because you've agreed to that, you agree to the more extreme interpretations, which is in equity's case, quotas.
Yeah.
Right, that's the sort of unspoken thing, and we see a very good example of this right now. Actually, right now, there's a couple that I've identified, but Canada research chairs. Right, so if you're a white male, right now, a white male in academia, and you want a Canada research chair, you're not going to get one. You're not going to get one, not until 2030, because they're not going to permit a white male to get one. And the reason for that is they need to hit their quotas. And so we've got 5 Canada research chairs coming up in, I think, our department at UTM. And they will all, in order to apply, you will have to be either identify as a woman or identify into a racialized group or be Indigenous or disabled. And it does make me wonder, as I spoke to a friend of mine who's an academic, I said, have you considered transitioning? I mean, you don't actually have to transition, you just claim you are.
Of course.
You just claim you're non-binary, and then you would be able to apply.
Yeah.
These CRC these chairs, they're worth quite a lot of money. It's like, I think it's for 10 years and they get a very good salary and it's government funded. For that, I mean, how are they going to prove that that's not the case? In fact, denying it would be denying that person's lived experience, right?
That's right.
So good luck with that. Or people who might be able to trace some Indigenous heritage or even fabricate, like be pretendians, as we've heard that expression, and claim they have Indigenous heritage in order to be considered for these prestige jobs. So it's true discrimination is happening in Canada right now.
Absolutely.
In academia. So that's one example. And another one is, I think, Canada Health Institutes, CHIR, isn't it? So Canada Health Institutes of Research, is that what it is? Or something like that? I always forget what it stands for. Terrible when you forget these things. CAIHR is an organization that funds health research in Canada, and Canadian Health Institutes of I see that it's bugging me now. You have to go and look it up and put it in the notes at the bottom.
Will do.
The CIHR, okay, so they issue grants to academics to do research, and it's a very competitive process. They're usually quite big grants. And you get rated and ranked, if you like, by peers, and on a committee. There'll be a committee of peers, I guess, and they will read all the grants and provide rankings and so on. And so it was tradition that there'd be a cutoff for those that are successful. So, you'd have to score a certain number of points. And they would also let the unsuccessful applicants know what their score was, so they could see how close or not they came to the threshold of getting an award, right? No. But now they won't give you the score. So they're not going to release the score. And the reason for that is because then it'll be very difficult to, come and argue over, well, it allows them some flexibility behind the curtain, you see.
Of course.
Right. Well, yes, you didn't score high enough. You might have been extremely close, or might even have scored high enough, but you might have been demoted because you didn't have the correct, innate characteristics, like you were the wrong sex, or you didn't, and so on, the wrong skin color, and so on. So they're already playing these games. Yeah. And this is a federal thing. So again, unless we get a sort of Polyev type government, that's going to just continue under Carney. That's going to continue. So there are some very clear examples where this kind of reverse discrimination is taking place, and that's in order to hit quotas, so that we have sufficient numbers of people in these jobs, which means it's anti-meritocratic. Yeah, and it's inevitably anti-meritocratic because you have to keep choosing. You're like, oh, I chose someone, and they're really good, and they meet the criteria, but they got the wrong characteristic, pick again. Yeah. Okay. Their argument is always, well, the people we pick are always qualified. Yeah. But it's because we've got a bigger pool. Yeah. That's what they'll say.
Yeah. I mean, I have an example recently of how this happened at Victoria College. So we have these things called Crescam Serviendo Awards, basically recognizing student service to the college community. I call them Scam Serviendo Awards because you're about to understand why. There was 44 nominees this year for this award. Basically, a fellow student has to nominate you. You can't campaign. You can't go around asking people to nominate. It has to be an organic nomination, which once again, the validity of that, I don't know. I'm sure that there was some of these winners who obviously are friends and they just kind of nominate each other. Yes. And so there's 44 nominees, 10 winners, 10 of these awards to be given out. And you would think, once again, the merit should be the dictator of who wins these awards. And, I went in. I think that personally I've contributed a ton. So I walked in there. My friend Jacob nominated me. Very grateful for his nomination. And my service basically consists of this podcast, which is 0% school funded, right? I didn't want to sign up for that because there would be all these restrictions like we're talking about. I'd have to have a certain number of, black students or racially diverse students. Once again, I don't know the qualifications. This is just my assumption because I've seen it with all these other types of clubs. You'd have to have certain team members. I don't have a team. I do this by myself because it's efficiency. A lot of these clubs at U of T, there's like 20 club members and the club does nothing. So I just wanted to be me, quick, efficient. I paid for all the equipment myself. It doesn't cost the college community anything. These clubs, when they say that they're funded from the pool of money that is there for student clubs, in other words, it's basically the money that you pay as a student that goes into funding college community. So with these clubs, the main point, I'm getting to the final conclusion here, which is the 10 winners. The 10 winners, you would be shocked to find out that there were 9 women, 9 girls, and a gay guy. Those are the winners. And you would think, okay, that's not a big deal if they all deserved it, right? Of course. But side by side, you should see what some of these people were nominated for. It was unbelievable. And for things like even being a Don, I don't consider service to the community because you get paid. You get free residence and food for the year. That's not service. That's a job.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry that's the case, but
I now discard the validity of the award. It's a Scam Serviendo Award. It doesn't mean anything anymore.
You're right.
Whereas, and the reason that I even bring it up is because I'm not upset over it for myself. I was talking about it with my girlfriend. I was like, I need you to understand, I'm not getting, I'm not caring so much about this because Carter Ponce didn't win an award. I have enough to prove that, I've achieved at the University of Toronto that I'm proud of the work I've done in my time here. But it's the precedent that it sets for future students that if you start a podcast that, interviews, and just naturally we have had a diverse, array of guests, from professors to the president to student athletes, DJs, it goes across the board. If you start a podcast that interviews a large swath of the college community, garner millions of views in the clips that we post, but you don't necessarily align with the movement that we're a part of, if you don't necessarily align with this suicidal empathy that is so prevailing at university, we're not recognizing your efforts. It doesn't matter.
Well, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, this is what Peter Boghossian has talked about as well. I mean, we could call it, in this instance, award laundering, right? He talks about, articles in the literature being basically unreliable. It's idea laundering in that case, because, people will write papers and cite each other, and it just kind of, once you've got enough citations, it makes it true. It just makes it true.
Yeah.
And so I would say that that's a good deal of. I wouldn't trust any awards get granted by universities now. In fact, if I were an employer, I would take that as a negative.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're saying this as a U of T professor.
Yeah, I would take that as a negative because I'll qualify that. If it's Dean's List and stuff like that, then I will recognize that, because that's still within the framework of your GPA and your scoring, even though I think all of the marking has been diluted across the board. But nevertheless, I still understand the idea of Dean's Honours List, because from my understanding, it's nothing to do with anything other than the marks you've achieved. But maybe I'm wrong on that too. But all of the other awards that you see given out, I would mistrust them. Yeah. I won awards myself, and I'm pretty confident, because it was like 30 years ago, that I was given them for the right reasons, which was, I got the Watson Prize for chemistry, for scholarship in chemistry, which was Warwickshire County Council's top prize for a chemist. When I went to Oxford, I got that Watson Prize. And that was nothing to do. I mean, obviously, they didn't know anything about me, other than my score in, I don't know, my A levels or something like that. So, that's how it used to be. But today, no, I wouldn't trust it. And if I were hiring people in a company, I'd be very mistrustful, actually. So it's almost like the reverse, because if somebody's got lots of these awards, it's like, what have they been doing? And
complying with everything.
And
fitting the mold.
And then frankly, if I interviewed them and they were from one of these groups of belonging, that would compound it. Because, even though the person might be excellent, I think, well, these awards have been shoved onto this person potentially, because the people shoving the awards are virtue signaling. And the point is, it's not about the people, it's not about the recipients anymore. It's about the people granting the awards.
That's right.
Right? They want to look good. And it's interesting you mentioned 9 to 1, even if we just talk about gender there. Right? What are the chances of that? I mean, if we've got 50-50, I mean, as I said, we don't actually have 50-50, but let's say, for the sake of argument, we did have 50-50 in the student population that were eligible for this award. What are the chances that all 9 of them, 9 out of 10 of them are women? It's pretty remote. Right? Because you'd have to work that out, but it's like coin toss each time.
And it's like,
let's go 9 heads in a row? Really?
And it doesn't matter if they all won it off merit. But then you side by side, it's like
but that's suggesting that women are more talented than men.
Right.
You're just saying, well, maybe it's just merit. Maybe it is merit. Maybe that's true. But then, isn't that sort of indicative? Isn't that a sample size that would sort of allow for the suggestion that typically then women are higher performers? Now, I mean, actually, I think women are higher performers on average, but not by that amount.
Right.
It does strike me, it just doesn't, something seems wrong, right? Something doesn't quite smell right there.
Equity commissioner of a cafe that nobody frequents gets chosen above this.
It's all a bit, anyway, it doesn't reflect the equity that they pursue. Right. Let's say at university it's 60% female, 40% male, then surely that should be reflected in the awards. right? If we're going on the equity argument. Now, if we revert to it's no, we just want the best people, so we don't care about that. Then, of course, it is a rare event, but it is like 9 coin tosses in a row, and that does start to make you wonder.
Absolutely.
So I'm highly suspicious now.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what else is going on behind the curtain. I mean, it's that,
of course.
The Wizard of Oz thing is like, what machinations? Who's pulling what levers now, and for what reason? And it's usually to advance these particular agendas, right?
I'm interested in asking you about what would you say to young students, let's say like myself, who wanted to, this is now I actually do, but let's say a few years ago, I wanted to speak out about some of this stuff, but it was like the community, the environment was just so suffocating, and there's social consequences to it.
Big consequences.
Someone who wants to speak their mind at a university campus, or just someone who feels silenced,
I think it depends on your economic situation. If you're from a wealthy family and you feel that way, go for it. Because you're sort of untouchable, because the biggest distinguishing thing in life these days is still economic kind of well-being, isn't it? And so there's a big gap between those who have and those who haven't, and it's polarized, but that's the one that counts, the economic scale. So if you're wealthy,
should be pretty easy.
You probably just go, screw this, I'm going to say things. But for most people, that's a tiny fraction of people, and it's not to say that those people would go against the grain anyway, right? A tiny fraction of people. So the majority of people are stuck going, well, I can't really say anything because I need this degree. And I need to emerge in good standing. And I can't have these. I mean, I'm 55. And, I'm going to take early retirement because I want to go and do some other things. I'll go and be an entrepreneur again. So it'll be farewell to the university. But, I can do that. I can do that in good conscience, right? My career is behind me, or at least one career is behind me, right? I can still have another one. But would I have been so courageous, is that the word, or brave? Would I have been that courageous at university? No, it's courage, because you know what the prospects are. Right? Bravery is kind of like rushing into something when you know it's dangerous, but you don't really know what the dangers are. Right. Courage is when you know, and you have fear, and you sense the fear. You have fear of the consequences, but nevertheless, you go and do it. I wouldn't have been able to do that. No. So what would I say? I would probably skirt around it. I know that sounds cowardly, but I think there is a lot at risk at that age, and I would just try to get through as fast and smoothly as possible. And try to ignore all of this stuff, which is very difficult to do, by the way. I would certainly learn to dismiss things, as you pointed out, about the plaudits that people achieve. They're meaningless for the most part. Focus on your own performance and do a good job. Work hard. Plan for tomorrow. It's a sort of classic element of belief of conservatives, I suppose, which is, always trying to incrementally improve, value what you have and be proud of what you've done, but also, always look to improve, and that utopia is not realizable, certainly not overnight, which is kind of the view that I think the Marxists essentially take. They're going to knock everything down in order to achieve a new utopia. But I don't feel that a destructive approach to things is at all valuable. Not when it comes to you build, right? So work hard, study hard, for your own benefit, not for anybody else's. You're doing it for you. You're not doing it for your parents, right? You're not doing it for your girlfriend. You're not doing it for the professor. You're doing it for you. Take responsibility for that. I think that's what Peterson talks about, taking responsibility. I think it's, be an agent of change in your own life first, and then from that will spill all sorts of positive things. You can help other people out as well, but you can't help Was it that thing on the aeroplane where, you put on your own mask before you put someone else's on?
Right.
So it's the same idea, I guess. But in this instance, you might not want to die on that hill because it's early in your career.
Yeah.
Right. I don't mind dying on that hill.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think they're wrong, and somebody has to do it, and professors need to stand up. Many of the younger ones will not. If they're pre-tenure, they definitely will not. I know several professors who side with me on some of these topics, but they're not going to say anything because they have families and mortgages, and this is their job, and it's a secure job, and they are not going to put it at risk. So, and I can't really blame them for that. It's just I have an opportunity to speak out. But what then happens is you get targeted. So, and that's sort of what happened with this PES project, posting on Instagram, and that kind of shocked me.
Yeah.
I don't know why I should be. I mean, it's sort of a derangement. You only have to read it. First of all, apparently I'm homophobic.
I guess, for people who don't know exactly what we're talking about, I can just read the post out really quick. Mm-hmm. The PES project on Instagram, they're apparently a student advocacy group against sexual assault on the U of T campus. Of course, they found a way to politicize something as serious as sexual assault, which I consider incredibly irresponsible because you have people who, once again, so they put out a list. And the first slide, it was a Instagram carousel post, and the first slide reads, documenting the University of Toronto's longstanding history of complacency and protection of problematic and or predatory professors. And then they gave some trigger warnings. They said, here's the overview. This document was created last year in order to document how the University of Toronto has been complacent and protected their predatory professors, and is available in our link tree. U of T has a long history of being complacent with professor misbehavior and not taking abuse seriously. Enough is enough. U of T students and survivors, they say, deserve to have a safe learning environment. So there's a type of mistake. We should not have to put up with predatory profs. So they include Dr. Leigh Revers in this post, and I think it's insane.
I'm a predator. I predate.
They include you in this list of, once again, and I don't even know if the allegations against these other professors can be taken seriously either.
No, let me make a point about this. The whole thing is deranged, right? They have no business whatsoever in interfering in these matters.
Right.
If there is harassment on campus, then students should report it, and then that needs to be looked into. Absolutely, 100%. Professors should not be there harassing students in any way, shape, or form.
And just
by
clear,
harassment, sorry.
Your allegations, you weren't, accused of harassment in any sense. They accused him of transphobia, homophobia, racism, fat phobia, which at the University of Toronto, from the PES project, basically just means this guy's probably got a good head on his shoulders, because these words mean nothing anymore.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I know, and it's the conflation of ideas. I mean, that's why I was a bit horrified, because they've put me up there with a bunch of other folks that have actually got some sexual misconduct cases, I believe.
Right.
Now, but even there, an organization like this doesn't, they're intervening.
Yeah.
Right. Those matters are looked at extremely seriously anyway by the university. Those individuals that have been identified will be, investigated, and the truth of allegations and all of that would come out in that. I mean, the university's not, certainly not there trying to protect professors unnecessarily, when they've committed those kinds of crimes. Yeah. Misbehavior or misconduct is the proper term, misconduct, right? But to have an opinion is not misconduct.
Yeah.
And they also talk about problematic professors. That's how they kind of bring it in, because, rather than predatory, predatory obviously suggests, someone who's making sexual advances.
Yeah.
They're talking about, problematic professors. Well, what are they?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't like that professor because, he goes too quickly. That makes him a bit problematic. So is that sufficiently problematic to put up on here?
Right.
So what they've decided to do is to include people like me whose opinions they dislike.
Yeah.
It's amusing when you're a gay man like I am, is to be called homophobic. That's really funny. Yeah. I don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh my God, I'm gay. I hate that. We could talk for hours about why I think being gay is wonderful.
Yeah.
But it's so ridiculous for a start off. So even that's madness. But the other things are based on opinions that I've shared. Transphobia, which means anyone who in any way has any criticism whatsoever of the trans movement. I do actually object to some of the things the trans movement has been encouraging, such as, let's say, emphasizing, gender-affirming care for minors, for young people. Well, as we know from Heather Barnes's work at the Tavistock Clinic in the UK, we know for a fact that the majority of young people who went to that clinic with gender dysphoria emerged through puberty as being gay. And so, you are eradicating gay people.
Yeah.
You are setting them up to sterilize them, go on a path of sterilization, ultimately. First of all, puberty blockers. 99% of the people who are given puberty blockers go on to cross-sex hormones, and from there, many go on to surgery. Well, once you're in that territory, you've got irreversible long-term effects, and many of those people would have resolved their gender dysphoria by emerging as gay, people like me. So that is homophobia, right?
Yeah.
That is homophobia.
Absolutely.
So they don't understand this. They don't understand what it means, actually, for same-sex people, same-sex attracted people, like myself, who are shamed, right? Many will know that gay men, they interact socially and they hook up on apps like Grindr. And, of course, the straight community has Tinder and various others, right, I imagine. And the idea that an app like that would not permit its users to exclude trans men from their dating pool, which you cannot, means to say if you were trying to do that would make you a transphobe, so you can't do it. So then you could potentially be in a situation where you're trying to interact with someone who's actually not the sex you thought. I mean, how is that even? I mean, that could end up being sexual harassment in a way.
Yeah, 100%.
So, I memean, and lesbians have the same problem. That, you've got men who've been admitted into their communities. Yeah. So no, you see how this plays out, right? Yeah. So for gay people, the trans movement has become an existential threat, actually. It's the new face of homophobia.
Yeah.
So we don't like that. And so but then they just say you're transphobic, So fine, if that's all you've got. They don't have an argument for this. They don't have a counter argument. So I always, I want to be a champion for gay men. I think, obviously as a group, we've suffered oppression. There's that word, but we have. I mean, it's legitimately the case that, I always think of Alan Turing and the terrible things that the British government did to Alan Turing. Sterilized him, right? One of the greatest minds in science and mathematics, and it was pivotal in the direction of the Second World War and the Enigma Code and all of that. It's an incredible story. So of course we know there have been terrible wrongs in the past, but I mean it's just got out of hand.
And it's how ironic is it that it's these feminist groups that are the ones talking about how it circles back to that theme of an intellectual safe space. Historically, the feminist movement, when, we didn't have as many women in universities, the idea was that we don't need to be sheltered from hard ideas. We can face them just as well as men can. The
Correct.
Husbands don't need to keep us in the household. We are able to confront these challenges.
Yeah, it's a liberation, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's one of the greatest, emancipation of women is one of the most important things that took place across the 20th century. And, so I mean, it's ridiculous that they want safe spaces. Actually, I mean,
they're proving the point of the men from
we
the time.
Can't handle it.
Yeah, we can't. I want to go back in the home.
No, it's bonkers, isn't it? Yeah, again, you see, so the logic, it's very easy to poke holes in the logic.
Yeah.
So they said a bunch of things about me, and then they said I wrote some bigoted articles in the newspaper, and fine. Again, that word crops. Everyone's a bigot now.
Yeah.
So what's amusing about that is, of course, I sort of got circulated, and I got emails of support. Eric Kaufman wrote and said, "Leigh, that's fantastic. You've had an impact. Because it's a badge of honor in a way."
Based off of this post.
Mm-hmm.
Based off of this post that they saw.
Yeah. He just said it was funny.
Yeah.
because it's like we've all been there,
100%.
right? So everyone that's in the retinue of the heretics, right, which I'm now part of, people like Lawrence Krauss and there's a long list of them actually. So Eric, we've got Carl Saltzman on there. There's a whole bunch of these people who are connected now. There's quite a few Canadians for sure in the group. I think it's actually primarily a Canadian group, and GADSAT, of course. So yeah, there are academics who've recognised the stupidity of some of these movements. They're going to continue to pursue people like me, presumably. It's of little consequence as far as I'm concerned. I'm just going to stand by my right to have an opinion. I don't mind debating it. In fact, I would happily debate those people on any of those topics.
Absolutely.
And they never come forward, do they?
No.
Because they don't have a position to argue from. That's the only argument they've got is no debate. So it's a very weak position, and it relies on people's goodwill. It's a moralizing kind of view to the world, which is this is the moral high ground, join us and be a good person. And that's how they get people, actually. Ironically, conservatives often fall into this because conservatives tend to have a view to being morally upstanding, right? You know, they have traditional values and we need to be a good person in society. And so, ironically, a lot of people could just fall into this trap, which is to believe that they're virtuous. And in fact, they're not. They're the most appalling demagogue types. I mean, they're narcissists. They are incapable of critical thinking. They have bizarre thoughts processes in terms of, nothing is logical. And partly I would say it's not their fault because they've been taught by a bunch of professors who think that way.
Yeah.
So if we continue to educate people that way, they're going to think that way. And that will lead to the broadest brush to this is the decline of the West. I mean, this is what Douglas Murray has talked about, right? The war on the West, the idea there are so many features now about our own culture that we've learned to despise and are trying to dismantle. That's not a good look, I don't think. Yeah. So I would hope that it'll pass, but people are going to have to fight for it. Yeah. Do you want your freedom? Yeah, I want my freedom. Do you want the freedom to say what you think openly? Yes. Nobody wants to live in North Korea. There's a good case, isn't there, of that particular student who escaped from North Korea only to come to, was it Stanford or one of the U.S. universities, only to find that they'd kind of been trapped in another safe space, essentially, and had to curtail everything, to censor everything they wanted to say, and that it was like as bad as being North Korea. I thought it was that's a real eye-opener. Yeah. So being forbidden to have an opinion definitely is not good. It's not good for the intellect, right? Prove me wrong. Yeah, okay, let's have a debate. And frankly, I lose debates all the time. With friends of mine who are very bright, and I don't mind losing. I mean, of course, I've got skin in the game. I want to win, but in the end, use your critical thinking. You can have logic. You can look at evidence. Scientific thinking, I think, is always a good one. I do believe in objective truth, and for all those postmodernists who don't, go and toss yourself off a balcony and see if you land. I think we could, if we know what height you're falling from, we could work out precisely the speed that you hit the ground, and we can measure that, and then we'll check it out afterwards, right, and see if it correlates with the measures. No, it's hilarious. It's totally hilarious. They all know the scientists are right. Yeah.
Is university past saving, do you think? Because this is a topic that I know that you talked about a little bit where
it's difficult to...
Peter Boghossian is more of the type...
burn it all down.
Burn it all down. But you make the argument, you're like, there's actually a lot of infrastructure and equipment that we need at traditional universities, and we can't just move it online.
Burning it all down, obviously. I mean, I think in a sense he does want to shove a Molotov cocktail through the window of the faculty club or whatever, right, and blow it all up. But He's a true academic terrorist, right? What a fantastic guy. He's a really nice guy, by the way. Super guy. Love Peter. But I would say, yeah, you do need, there's a lot of expensive infrastructure, certainly laboratories, and it's mostly in equipment that have accumulated, vastly expensive pieces of kit, like NMR machines and so on, incredible stuff that's cost, taxpayer dollars and all of that. We're not going to throw that all away. But in dismantling the structures, I just don't know how to get to the point where this can all be obliterated, right? I mean, Trump's trying to do it in the US. You have to have financial incentives. So my various points to fix universities, tax the endowments, or at least the income from endowments immediately, and use that money actually then to, correct for some of the failures. Sort of reinvesting in the correct direction. We want a return to merit, emphasis on science. I don't mind the other subjects. I love the other subjects, but they've been horribly diluted or captive. When you can't do Western civilization and you can't study that at university or whatever. I know for a fact that, because my partner is involved in this, Canadian studies. It's hilarious, right? Because it's all about decolonizing, and they really need to get off that. Yes, of course, there's plenty to be said about the colonial era, and we can certainly have a reproving attitude towards it. But it's so monomaniacal. They don't think about all of the good things that have emerged in Canada because of what is essentially, a modernization, a very rapid modernization that occurred because of colonial powers coming here, both France and Britain. And taking it in context and taking responsibility for the past. But, we're not going to repay everybody out for the rest of our existence. That's ridiculous. You need to be sympathetic to indigenous populations, and there's a culture shock of the whole thing. But it's obscene in Canada, the way that's gone. So yeah, I still have those subjects. It's just they just have to be less ideological. So that needs to be done. Obviously you need to dismantle the administration. There's way too many administrators. It's ballooning costs. It's being footed by taxpayers and by students by virtue of tuition fees. Much of that money is being wasted. I've seen examples of tremendous waste. Millions of dollars spent on ridiculous, frivolous things.
Like what?
Well, I can give you an example. So back in the day, we had a principal on our campus, right? So each campus has a principal. Yep. So we have a principal. It's the top job. It's quite typical that a principal will get a residence. So our principal will get a residence. And I know that when I was in my heyday, the principal's position went to someone called Uli Krull, and he declined actually to occupy the principal's residence because he had his own home anyway. And he said the university should use it for events and for student things, and which I thought was fantastic. What a great, that what subsequent to that though, the next occupant actually took residence, and it's perfectly legitimate that they did. But I did hear then, that new incumbent, there was a ballooning of her staff, right? So suddenly, where in the past the principal would have, a small handful of people whose job it was to kind of look after the principal and principal's kind of activities. Now it's sort of doubled or tripled in size. You've got a full, what I call an entourage, right? And then it was decided to spend, nearly 1.3 million Canadian dollars just refreshing a portion of one of the buildings entirely for the presidential suite. Jeez. Right, for the office space. No, that included the president's office, but also all of the entourage's office, right? Well, that's quite a bit of money to spend on administrative office space, right? When we've got really dire need elsewhere for, laboratories to be updated and teaching spaces to be updated. It just seemed, really, why are you spending all that money on bureaucrats?
Yeah.
1.3 million, really? So I felt that was overindulgent. Now they'll argue it needed to be done and so on. Of course, who am I to say these things? It just, the optics about it, as far as I'm concerned. And there've been examples of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you see the top apparatchiks, the high priests of all of this, and all of these people, by the way, are remorselessly woke, right? Remorselessly so. What you see and what they do and how they spend money, let's say, and endless programs that are focused on, I don't know, bias training and decolonizing and alerting every academic to their privilege and all of that, and their inherent white supremacy, let's say. Any of these things, they're all terribly important. They're just obsessed with it, and they're spending money on it, and it's wasteful.
Yeah,
it's fundamentally wasteful. So I would like to see that money going on teaching, on research, in the ways that traditionally it would have done. We're getting, it's very reminiscent of what triggered the Reformation, right? The practice of indulgences that the Catholic Church kind of entertained. The idea that you could, if you put some money into the the collection tray, essentially, that you would buy off your sins, from purgatory or whatever that you would experience, right? That you could pay now and offset those rather negative things that are going to happen after death. So the sort of the sense of indulgences, university, I think, that's how I feel about it. I think there could be a reformation. I hope there is. So I don't think it's over. I don't think it's all going to just burn. Needs to be burnt to the ground. But there has to be some significant pressure from the financial perspective, and it will come. We've got a shrinking student population, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Canada has a declining birth rate. Our replacement rate is very low. Yeah. It's like 1.4, or even lower than that. That means, and I think we're coming into it now where there's a sort of precipice coming up. 2025 might well mark the beginning of this, which is the generation that will be coming in to enroll in university has shrunk in size. Mm-hmm. There's just fewer people in Canada. Yeah. And so universities will be chasing those students, right? And international students can't provide a solution because the visas have been halted, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to have shortfalls. So universities just simply, for financial reasons, won't have the capacity to survive in the way that they're surviving right now. Yeah. I don't think. So we'll see some change.
So for solutions other than, hoping that things course correct here, stuff like online education, self-education, do you think that could be a path? Because I know a lot of young people today are just thinking, I have YouTube, I have ChatGPT, I have the internet, I have the world's knowledge at my fingertips. Do you think that could replace traditional education? Do you think it should? Are there downsides to that?
There's definitely downsides to it. The socialization kind of part of it, I think. There's so much more in the experience of university, certainly as I had it, to what you would get if you were just on a laptop. It's a way of life, right?
Yeah.
But I would argue it hasn't been that way for quite a while. I'm harking back, as I say, to my Oxford experience, which was that I relocated to Oxford from home, and you would live there in the city, usually in college accommodation for the period of the term, and then go back. And so you were living in the city where you were doing a degree at the university. So it was it was your whole life, and so you had to learn to be independent. You weren't living at home. Your mum wasn't cooking dinner. We were coddled to a degree. I mean, the college I was at used to provide excellent meals, and you would go, and it's all subsidized and fantastic. But that was part of it. It was like you had to embrace there was a holistic experience, right? And of course, then there's the culture of it. There's the socializing with other students and getting to learning about yourself and how you interact with people your own age and as you're becoming an adult, right? It's a very important growing experience, which I don't think I could have ever had if I was always at home. So there's that part, the growing up part, and I think universities that stepping off point for that. So I don't want to see the decline of universities in that regard. I don't think you can possibly get that just from sitting in front of a screen. That sort of suggests that the only thing you really need is to download knowledge. Yeah, and it's not. It's to learn who you are.
Absolutely.
And learn how you interact with others of like-minded or different-minded individuals who, you might disagree with, you might agree with, making friends, uncovering your interests and joining, different social groups, like I did with the Film Foundation. Lifelong friendships spring from some of that stuff. So I do think it can't be replaced in its entirety. I mean, I do think, though, that many universities, such as U of T, might have lost a great deal of what I'm talking about in any case. Certainly on the Mississauga campus, it's like a commuter campus, right? So people drive on, go to a class, and then drive off home. And so they might well be living at home for good reason, because it's expensive to live by yourself. Many of these people are living with family, and then they just go in like it's school. But university is not school to me.
Yeah.
Right? School is school, and university is something different.
Yeah.
So I think we do need university. I don't know whether we need as many people to go to it. That's the other thing. Everyone feels like they need a university degree. Do you? Do you really?
Yeah.
We've been told that, right? You can do a lot better financially, potentially, if you go and do plumbing.
Right.
Right, because there's going to be a big need for trades. And hey, look at Canada, right? We've got problems in the housing market, too many expensive homes. Nobody can get on the property ladder. We need to build more homes. Well, somebody's got to build those homes, so we need qualified tradespeople. There's nothing at all wrong with those careers. You can make really, really good money, right? I had a problem in one of my I bought a property in the UK, and I had a problem with the plumbing. I drilled through drilled into the wall and through a pipe, and completely messed up the whole heating system, and it all leaked everywhere. I had to get a plumber in, and it was a 5 to 10 minute job for him to fix it, right? To pull the tubing out of the wall and trim it and patch it and put it back in, and that cost me $800.
Yeah.
And it cost him, the journey there, it was under $100 it would have cost him for everything, including materials and everything. So he made $700 for doing 15 minutes work. Right? I mean, that's pretty good for an hour, isn't it? Right? So, yeah, it's foolish to think that you can't make great money doing other professions. And what are you going to do with this gender studies degree?
Yeah.
Right. Anyway.
Who are you helping?
Yeah. How are we doing for time?
We're doing pretty good. We're just about ready to wrap up. My batteries are almost fully gone. So
okay.
It's been a fantastic conversation. I'm just going to arrange the cameras one more time.
Sure.
And if you have any final thoughts, just kind of a final message to give to the students here, and
sure,
we can wrap up.
Okay. Let me have a think about that. Yeah. Final thoughts is always... it's always interesting to try to come up with something. I think university is an incredible experience, at least in conception. I don't know whether universities are fairly delivering on that promise. I don't think they are. Some people will go to university today, and by virtue possibly of the fact that they are, quite well off, because of their family background, they might have a very, very different experience to someone who isn't. Someone who can't afford to live away from home, let's say, things of that nature. It's supposed to be this important period of your life where you become an adult for real. Between 18 and 25, right? Depending on 18 and 21, 22, depends how long you're there for. And if you don't get to have it, I can see how you feel you will have missed out. But I think there's a lot of people going to university today that are not really getting that full experience. Right? And the professors are more remote than ever before. And the professors are scared of students because, again, if they misspeak, you see what happens. Some of us, my case would be an example that to others. others amongst my profession to go, gosh, we don't want to end up like he did. So they're going to be especially careful. They're going to fail to challenge their students because there's a potential to offend, and that can lead to career limiting outcomes for the professors. So I think the professors are sort of retreating, not only from the students but also from the administrators who hold them to task.
Yeah.
So the other thing I would say is administrators hold professors to task because of student opinion surveys, which are given increasing value because it's a stick that you can beat professors with.
Yeah.
You know, students don't understand that, but it didn't used to be the case. I mean, we just do them, and you know, if you got intolerably bad ones, you might be told by your chair to sort it out. Yeah. But generally, they would be largely ignored because there's a sort of my side bias always from the students, right? You know, if they didn't do very well in a course, then they're going to moan.
Yeah. Right.
So, and professors knew this, so they wouldn't take it too seriously. But now administrators, they look at those and they go, oh, well, look, and they look at it almost at a level of surgical precision, and they say, well, the average across the department was this, and you were 2 points below the average, and you know, and so on, and this will affect your income, and this will affect.
Jeez.
Yeah, well, it'll in terms of your incremental income, right? Yeah,
for sure.
So your bonus, if you like, which is. You know, you didn't do very well this year, and then they'll beat you up for it, and then they'll send you on training, and so you've got professors in retreat. Professors in retreat, that's not a good sign.
No.
And it makes it less attractive for the best and brightest, I would say, to actually engage in being university professors. And the people who are actually emerging as successful are the ones that know how to toe the party line. They're the ideologues, and so it's incredibly far left-leaning. I would consider myself now centre-right, pretty much. I'm not far-right by any means. Centre-right, and there's barely anyone who has views like I do. So I think that's what I'm worried about in university. I hope students get what they can out of it right now. I don't think it's what they should be getting out of it. But take that degree and run, because I don't think students can fix it at all. I think it's got to be coming through from government in the end. But I've had a great time. I mean, you know, in the end, the last 2 years of my life have been the most exciting. It's the most incredible experience, right? People can cancel you, and then all sorts of amazing things happen.
Opportunity.
Absolutely. I met Jordan Peterson. I met Peter Boghossian. I've met, you know, all sorts of famous people at the art conference in London in February. I've had opportunities now to write for Ayaan Hirsi Ali, writing in the National Post. I've got my own Substack. And, you know, I've had critics, but also you meet new friends. And my friend Mark D'Souza as well, who's now a best-selling author. He and I are close friends, and we're collaborating on a number of projects. And I think you'll see there's more to come.
Absolutely. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen,
thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
That is Dr. Leigh Revers, episode 100. You can follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vic, and we will see you next Sunday. Peace out.